A mission that should have stayed buried beneath the Arctic ice. Fog of War. Chapter 1. Tell Walker the plane vanished 40 miles north of the pipeline. The voice crackled through the satellite phone speaker, while freezing rain hammered the windows of the de Havilland prop plane. Cole Walker sat alone near the rear cargo netting, with a duffel bag between his boots and a paper cup of bad coffee cooling in his hand. The pilot glanced back from the cockpit. "You, Walker?" Cole looked out the window at endless black clouds over Alaska. "Depends who's asking." The pilot snorted. "Government answer." Cole drank the coffee anyway. Tasted like burned wiring and old pennies. The satellite phone crackled again. "Walker." Cole picked it up. "Yeah. You're late. You called me 12 hours ago. You're still late." Female voice. Calm. Washington voice. Expensive education wrapped around impatience. Cole leaned back against the cargo wall. "What crashed?" "Officially. Weather research aircraft." "And unofficially?" Silence stretched for a second. Then, "Military transport." Cole watched snow streak across the window. "That narrows it down to several thousand planes." The woman ignored the joke. "A cargo aircraft disappeared near the Beaufort corridor 3 hours ago. We lost telemetry before impact." "Military recovery teams?" "Delayed." Meaning somebody reached the crash site before we could." That got his attention. The prop plane shuddered hard in turbulence. The pilot muttered something ugly under his breath while fighting the controls. Cole pressed the phone tighter against his ear. "What cargo mattered enough to drag me into Alaska?" Another pause. "Passenger." "One passenger." "Yes." "Who?" "We'll discuss that after retrieval." Cole smiled faintly. "That means scientist." Silence again. Second confirmation. The woman finally spoke. "You'll land in Deadhorse. Local contact will provide transport north." "Who am I avoiding?" "You ask too many questions. And you pay me because I keep surviving the answers." The line went dead. Cole handed the phone back to the pilot. The man shoved it into his jacket pocket. Government people always sound constipated. Cole looked outside again. Nothing beneath them, except frozen wilderness stretching forever under storm clouds. Oil pipelines cut across the snowfields like black scars. No roads. No towns. Just ice and distance. The pilot adjusted course. "Storm's getting worse. You picked a hell of a week to visit. I hear tourism drops this time of year." The pilot barked a laugh. Then the aircraft hit another patch of turbulence hard enough to throw the coffee cup across the cabin. Cole caught himself against the cargo netting while the prop engines whined louder. The pilot glanced back again. "You military?" "No. You move like it." Cole picked up the spilled cup. "So do a lot of criminals." That answer shut the pilot up for a while. The storm thickened as they crossed farther north. The sky disappeared into gray static. Snow slammed the windshield hard enough to sound like gravel. The pilot worked the controls carefully now. "Jesus." "What?" "Picking something up on emergency frequency." Cole leaned forward slightly. "What kind of signal?" "Distress beacon." "From the crash?" "Maybe." The pilot adjusted a radio dial. Static hissed through the cabin. Then a voice burst through the interference. "Broken." "Panicked." "Under attack. Repeat, under attack." Gunfire cracked somewhere behind the transmission. Then screaming. The signal died. The pilot stared at the radio. Cole set the empty coffee cup down slowly. That sounded unhealthy. The pilot swallowed. No kidding. A red warning light blinked across the dashboard. The pilot checked instruments fast. We got another problem. What now? Somebody's painting us. Cole looked toward the cockpit. Painting us how? The pilot pointed toward a blinking radar indicator. Military targeting radar. Cole moved forward immediately. You sure? I flew Marines in Afghanistan. I know the sound. A warning tone chirped louder through the cockpit. Somewhere outside the storm, another aircraft tracked them. Cole scanned the clouds through the windshield. Nothing visible. Yet. The pilot shoved the throttle forward. This plane doesn't outrun anything. Can you land? In this. The prop plane bucked violently through crosswinds. Below them, frozen tundra rolled beneath blowing snow and darkness. No lights. No airstrips. Nothing. The radar warning tone accelerated. Cole unzipped his duffel bag and checked the contents. Compact rifle. Cold weather gear. Satellite locator. Pistol. 3 loaded magazines. Standard apology package from people who lied for a living. The pilot saw the weapon. Ah, hell. A shape burst through the storm clouds behind them. Black helicopter. No lights. Fast. The pilot cursed loudly. That's military. Cole studied the aircraft through blowing snow. Modified transport bird. Door gun mounts. Professional. The helicopter matched speed off their left side. Then somebody opened fire. Tracer rounds tore across the prop plane's wing. Metal screamed. The cockpit exploded with warning alarms. The pilot fought the controls. We're hit. The left engine coughed smoke instantly. Cole braced himself against the bulkhead while the aircraft rolled sideways through turbulence. More tracers ripped past the windshield. The helicopter stayed beside them like a shark pacing wounded prey. Cole crawled toward the side cargo hatch and forced it partially open against the wind. Freezing air blasted into the cabin. The helicopter floated maybe 70 yards away through the storm. Door gunner, visible now. Heavy winter gear. Night optics. Not military issue. Private contractors maybe. Cole pulled the compact rifle from the duffel. The pilot looked back wild-eyed. You planning to shoot a helicopter? Only if it keeps bothering me. The prop plane dropped suddenly through an air pocket. Cole slammed against the cargo wall hard enough to bruise ribs. The helicopter swung closer. The gunner fired again. Rounds punched through the fuselage. One shattered the instrument panel. The pilot shouted, "We're going down." Cole planted himself beside the open hatch and waited for the helicopter to stabilize in the storm. Wind screamed through the cabin. Snow blasted his face. The gunship drifted closer for the kill. Too close. Cole fired 3 fast shots through the open hatch. The first missed wide. The second punched through the helicopter windshield. The third hit the door gunner high in the chest. The gunner vanished backward into the cabin. The helicopter lurched sideways abruptly. Its pilot broke formation and climbed into the clouds. Buying space. Not much. Smoke poured from the damaged engine now. The prop plane spiraled lower over frozen wilderness. The pilot wrestled the controls with both hands. We're not making dead horse. Cole looked below. Jagged white terrain rushed beneath them through the storm. Frozen rivers. Ice fields. Black pine forests. Nowhere good to crash. The pilot glanced back once. Young guy. Maybe 30. Sweat running down his face despite the cold. You military? Cole checked the rifle again. No. You kill people often. Only when they insist. The pilot gave a short, nervous laugh. Then the dead engine caught fire. Flames spread across the wing outside the cockpit. The aircraft yawed hard left. The pilot fought it desperately. Brace. The prop plane slammed through treetops. Branches exploded across the windshield. Metal tore apart beneath them. Cole grabbed the cargo netting as the aircraft hit frozen ground and disintegrated into noise and fire. Everything became impact. Steel folding. Glass exploding. Cargo tearing loose. The world flipped sideways in a storm of smoke and snow. Then silence. Heavy silence broken only by crackling flames somewhere nearby. Cole opened his eyes slowly. Upside down. Still breathing. Good start. Blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow into one eye. The cockpit section had snapped away completely from the rest of the fuselage. Snow blew through twisted metal. The pilot hung motionless in shattered controls 30 feet away. Dead. Cole cut himself free from the cargo straps and dropped hard into freezing water flooding part of the wreckage. Pain shot through his shoulder. Nothing broken. Probably. He grabbed the duffel bag before flames reached the rear compartment. Outside, the storm swallowed everything beyond 20 yards. The aircraft burned across the ice field in pieces. Cole stumbled away from the wreck, carrying the rifle beneath his coat. Wind howled across the frozen landscape. Then he heard it. Snowmobiles. Multiple engines. Closing fast through the blizzard. Not rescue teams. Headlights appeared between the trees beyond the crash site. White camouflage. Armed riders. Disciplined spacing. They had tracked the plane all the way down. Cole moved toward the wreckage shadows and chambered around into the rifle. The first snowmobile emerged through the storm. And the rider carried military-grade thermal optics. Chapter 2. The first snowmobile cut through the blizzard, 30 yards from the burning wreckage. White camouflage. Black visor. Suppressed rifle slung across the rider's chest. The machine glided over the frozen terrain, smooth and controlled, while two more headlights followed deeper in the storm behind him. Cole crouched behind the shattered tail section of the crashed plane, with the compact rifle tucked tight against his shoulder. Wind shoved smoke and snow sideways across the ice field. The rider slowed near the wreckage. Scanning. Methodical. Looking for bodies. Cole watched the man sweep thermal optics across the burning debris. The rider stopped beside the dead pilot first. Checked the corpse. Then keyed a radio mounted on his chest. Russian accent drifted faintly through the storm. Professional voice. No panic. No excitement. Just work. Cole tracked him through the rifle sights and waited. The second snowmobile arrived from the tree line carrying another armed rider and a sled trailer loaded with gear. Recovery team. Not assassins. That complicated things. The first rider dismounted and walked toward the fuselage wreckage with his rifle low. Close enough now for Cole to see the patch on his sleeve, beneath the snow camouflage. Black wolf head. No national markings. Private outfit. The rider reached the broken cargo section and stopped suddenly. Saw the cut restraints hanging from the interior frame. Empty. The survivor had walked away. The rider spoke sharply into his radio. More engines answered through the storm. Cole shifted positions slowly behind the wreckage. Too many of them to fight head-on. One clean kill maybe. Two if the storm stayed ugly. After that, numbers one. The second rider knelt beside the sled trailer and pulled out a compact drone case. That changed the equation fast. Cole fired first. The suppressed rifle coughed once. The kneeling rider snapped backward into the snow before he understood what happened. The first mercenary reacted instantly and dove behind the burning fuselage. Good reflexes. Professional. Rounds punched through the aircraft wreckage toward Cole's position. The storm exploded into gunfire. Cole moved immediately. Never stay where the first shot came from. He sprinted low across the ice field, while tracer rounds carved through snow behind him. The mercenary shouted into his radio. More headlights appeared through the trees. Cole reached a pressure ridge of broken ice near the frozen riverbank and slid behind it as bullets shattered ice chunks overhead. The surviving mercenary advanced aggressively through the wreckage instead of waiting for backup. Confident guy. Cole spotted him moving through smoke with thermal goggles flipped down now. The man tracked heat signatures. That made hiding difficult. Cole yanked a flare from the emergency kit attached to the duffel and ignited it hard against the ice ridge. Bright red fire hissed violently through the storm. The thermal optics locked onto the heat source instantly. The mercenary pivoted toward the flare. Cole rose from the opposite side and fired twice. The first round hit center chest. Armor stopped most of it. The second punched through the man's throat, above the plate carrier. The mercenary collapsed backward into the snow, clutching his neck. Then engines roared closer. A lot closer. Cole grabbed the dead rider's snowmobile and kicked it alive. The machine growled beneath him. Military model. Fast. Good suspension. Whoever financed these people spent real money. Tracer rounds flashed through the storm as additional riders burst from the tree line. Cole accelerated hard across the frozen river just as bullets ripped through the snow behind the snowmobile tracks. The machine bounced violently over cracked ice ridges while freezing wind hammered his face. Behind him, 3 snowmobiles pursued in staggered formation. Not random shooters. Trained pursuit tactics. One rider peeled wide left, trying to cut him off downstream. Another stayed centerline. Third held back farther, with what looked like a heavier weapon mounted across the handlebars. Cole pushed the throttle harder. The river widened ahead, beneath blowing snow. Visibility collapsed to maybe 50 yards. Good for hiding. Bad for surviving thin ice. The snowmobile hit rough terrain and launched airborne over a pressure crack before slamming back down hard enough to nearly throw Cole sideways. The machine fishtailed violently. Recovered. Barely. Gunfire echoed again behind him. The rear pursuit rider opened up with the heavier weapon. Rounds tore across the ice surface, throwing frozen spray into the air around Cole. Definitely military hardware. Cole spotted dark shapes ahead through the storm. Pipelines. Oil infrastructure. Access roads. Civilization. Or the northern version of it. The pursuing riders spread wider as they closed distance. Trying to herd him. Cole cut sharply right, toward a line of abandoned drilling equipment half buried in snowdrifts beside the frozen river. The snowmobile roared through rusted steel structures and skeletal machinery left from older pipeline work. Good terrain for breaking pursuit. The center rider followed too aggressively. Cole slammed the brakes hard behind a collapsed fuel tank. The pursuing mercenary overshot the turn by a second. Enough. Cole fired through the storm. The rider toppled sideways off the snowmobile and smashed into frozen equipment hard enough to stay there. The third rider came around the machinery spraying automatic fire. Cole ducked beneath a rusted pipe assembly while rounds shredded metal overhead. The rider accelerated directly toward him. Bad decision. Cole grabbed a loose steel cable half frozen into the snow and yanked it across the narrow gap between drilling supports. The snowmobile hit the cable at full speed. Machine flipped instantly. Rider launched through the air headfirst into rusted machinery with a sound like dropped lumber. Silence followed, except for wind. Cole listened carefully. No more engines nearby. For now. He checked the stolen snowmobile quickly. Fuel low. One saddlebag attached. Inside. Spare ammunition. Thermal blanket. Satellite radio. Protein bars. Folded regional maps. Useful people to rob. Cole unfolded the map against the handlebars while snow swirled around him. A marked circle sat 20 miles north of the crash site. No label. Just coordinates. Probably where they expected the survivor to go. Or where they planned to move the survivor after recovery. Either way, it mattered. Headlights appeared suddenly beyond the pipeline road ahead. Different vehicles. Big. Industrial. Cole killed the snowmobile engine instantly and rolled behind the old drilling equipment again. 2 black trucks crawled through the storm along the service road. Heavy tires. Reinforced bumpers. Private security decals on the doors. Arctic extraction solutions. Corporate mercenaries pretending to be contractors. The lead truck stopped beside the old equipment yard. Doors opened. Men stepped out carrying rifles under insulated jackets. Not local workers. One man wore a white hard hat and carried a tablet computer. Executive type. Too clean for Alaska. He studied the wrecked snowmobile and dead mercenary half buried in the drift. Then looked directly toward Cole's hiding spot. Not seeing him. Feeling him, maybe. The executive tapped his earpiece. We lost Team 2. Texan accent. Expensive boots crunching through snow. Another man climbed from the truck, holding a suppressed rifle. Think the survivor's still alive? The executive looked toward the distant burning wreckage back across the river. If Walker survived Afghanistan and Caracas, he survived this. Cole stayed perfectly still behind the frozen machinery. The name drop bothered him. The executive continued. Find him before Volkov does. The rifleman frowned. You think she escaped the crash? Until I see a body. Volkov. The scientist. So the passenger survived. Good. That meant the mission still existed. The rifleman adjusted his weapon sling. What about the agency team coming in from Prudhoe? The executive's expression hardened. We stay ahead of them. One of the truck radios crackled suddenly. A nervous voice burst through the static. Sir, we got movement near pipeline checkpoint 6. The executive looked north. Local police. Negative. One female. Armed. The executive smiled slightly. Then we found our scientist. Cole watched the trucks begin turning north toward the checkpoint road. Opportunity moving away from him in real time. He looked down at the captured map again. Then toward the disappearing trucks. Snow hammered the frozen oil fields while black clouds swallowed the northern horizon. Cole started the snowmobile quietly and followed them into the storm. Chapter 3. The trucks killed their headlights 2 miles from checkpoint 6. Smart move. Snow swallowed the pipeline road ahead, while wind shoved white curtains across the frozen tundra hard enough to erase distance. Cole cut the snowmobile engine behind a berm of plowed ice and watched the convoy through drifting snow. 3 trucks now. The third vehicle had joined from another access road, carrying additional security personnel and a mounted communications array in the truck bed. Corporate outfit with military habits. The executive stepped from the lead truck and scanned the darkness through binoculars. Heavy winter coat. No gloves despite the cold. Confident men ignored discomfort because they expected other people to suffer first. Cole studied the checkpoint ahead. Portable floodlights illuminated a section of elevated pipeline where a small prefabricated utility station sat half-buried beneath snowdrifts. Two local security guards, crouched behind a loader tractor with hunting rifles, pointed shakily toward the darkness north of the checkpoint. One guard looked about 19. The other guy held his cigarette backward from panic. Not fighters. Oilfield workers dragged into somebody else's war. The executive walked toward them calmly. "You boys report a woman?" The younger guard nodded quickly. "She came out of nowhere, stole one of the med kits, and took off behind the station. Injured. Looked hurt. Alone." The older guard answered this time. "Think so." The executive smiled slightly. "Think gets people killed." One of his contractors moved around the utility station, carrying a suppressed rifle and thermal optics. Another climbed the pipeline access stairs for elevation. Disciplined search patterns. Cole slid off the snowmobile and moved low along the berm toward the rear side of the checkpoint. The wind helped. Covered sound. Killed visibility. He reached the utility station without drawing attention and crouched beside stacked fuel drums beneath the pipeline structure. Voices drifted above him through the steel framework. The contractor on overwatch keyed his radio. "Negative contact north side." Another voice answered through static. "She's here somewhere." Then a new sound reached Cole beneath the storm. Metal scraping softly. Close. He turned slowly. A woman crouched behind the fuel drums 10 feet away, pointing a compact pistol directly at his chest. Dark winter parka. Snow-covered hair tied back tight. Face streaked with blood from a cut above one eyebrow. Russian features. Sharp eyes. Alert eyes. She looked cold and furious in equal measure. Volkov. The scientist studied him carefully. "You are with them?" Cole shook his head once. "If I was, we'd already be having a shorter conversation." Her pistol stayed steady. "You followed the trucks." "I follow trouble." "Same route tonight." Voices moved closer around the station. Search teams tightening perimeter. Volkov glanced toward the sound. "They kill everybody who finds me." Cole looked at the blood on her sleeve. "You shot." "Glass from the crash." "Lucky." "No." Her expression hardened. "Lucky would involve beaches." One of the contractors rounded the corner, beside the utility station, carrying a rifle low against his chest. Cole moved instantly. He grabbed the man by the coat and yanked him behind the fuel drums before the contractor understood what happened. One hard elbow shattered the man's nose. Cole caught the rifle before it hit the snow. Volkov drove her pistol into the contractor's throat with brutal efficiency. The man collapsed, choking silently. Not helpless. Good. Cole dragged the body beneath the steel stairs. "You got a plan?" Volkov wiped snow from her face. "Yes. That makes one of us." The contractor above them spoke suddenly into his radio. "You see Harris?" Nobody answered. The overwatch guard moved toward the stairs. Cole checked the captured rifle. Compact suppressed platform. Expensive optics. Full magazine. Corporate budgets, staying healthy. Volkov watched him work the weapon. "You military?" "No. You kill people professionally. Everybody's got hobbies." The overwatch guard descended the stairs, cautiously now. Smart enough to notice silence. Cole motioned Volkov toward the rear fuel tanks. She moved smoothly, despite the injury. No wasted motion. No panic. The guard reached the bottom step and spotted blood in the snow instantly. Too late. Cole rose behind him and slammed the rifle stock into the back of his knee. The guard collapsed sideways with a cry cut short by Cole's forearm crushing across his throat. The man clawed for a sidearm. Cole drove him face first into the steel staircase, hard enough to end the struggle. Above the storm, engines rumbled suddenly from the southern road. New arrivals. Everybody at the checkpoint turned toward the sound. Black SUVs emerged through the snow in tight formation and rolled into the floodlights beside the pipeline. Government plates. The executive muttered something ugly under his breath. Cole watched men in cold-weather tactical gear climb from the SUVs carrying military rifles and federal badges clipped openly to chest rigs. Agency people. One older man stepped from the center SUV, adjusting leather gloves. Gray hair. Straight posture. Cold face carved from years of giving orders. Not field personnel. Management. The executive approached him carefully. You're early. The older man ignored the greeting. Where's Volkov? We tracked her here. Tracked. The older man's expression sharpened. You lost her. The executive glanced toward the utility station. We're containing the area. The agency man studied the checkpoint for a long second, then looked directly toward the fuel tanks where Cole and Volkov hid beneath the pipeline structure. Sharp instincts. Cole lowered himself deeper into shadow. Volkov leaned closer. Who are they? Federal. American intelligence. Probably. Her jaw tightened. They killed the aircraft. Looks crowded enough for everybody to share blame. One of the younger agency operators moved toward the utility station carrying a handheld thermal scanner. Problem arriving fast. Cole looked around the checkpoint quickly. Fuel tanks. Generator trailer. Pipeline controls. Heavy equipment. Too many civilians nearby for explosives. Volkov noticed the same calculation in his face. You already have an idea. I hate my ideas. The thermal operator rounded the corner. Scanner raised. The device beeped immediately. Heat signatures. The operator's head snapped toward the fuel tanks. Contact. Gunfire exploded across the checkpoint. Cole fired through the steel drum gaps while dragging Volkov behind the utility station. Rounds hammered the tanks around them. Workers screamed and dove for cover beneath vehicles. The corporate contractors and agency operators opened fire on each other almost immediately. Nobody trusted anybody anymore. The executive shouted, "Don't let them escape." Helpful clarification. Cole shoved Volkov toward the backside of the pipeline access road. Move. They sprinted through blowing snow, while tracer rounds slashed across the darkness behind them. The utility station generator exploded suddenly. Fireball. Black smoke. The blast knocked several shooters off their feet and plunged half the checkpoint into darkness. Cole and Volkov crossed beneath the elevated pipeline and slid down an embankment toward frozen drainage canals running parallel to the service road. Snowmobiles roared somewhere behind them. Pursuit restarting. Volkov stumbled briefly against the ice bank. Cole caught her arm. You good? She pulled free immediately. I do not need carrying. Excellent, because I hate cardio. A spotlight suddenly swept across the frozen canal behind them. One of the SUVs accelerated onto the service trail, with mounted floodlights blasting through the storm. Operators jumped from the moving vehicle while firing into the darkness ahead. Professional shooters. Tight formation. Cole grabbed Volkov and shoved her beneath a concrete drainage culvert, just as bullets shredded the ice bank above them. The SUV skidded sideways nearby. Doors opened. Boots hit snow. Then a calm voice echoed through the storm. Walker. Cole recognized the tone immediately. Government voice. Old predator voice. The gray-haired agency man stood beside the spotlight beam, scanning the darkness calmly, while snow gathered across his coat. "You've picked a difficult woman to protect." Cole stayed silent beneath the culvert. Volkov whispered beside him. "You know him?" "No." Lie came easy. The agency man continued. "You bring her in now, and everybody walks away breathing." Volkov stared at Cole carefully in the darkness. Reading him. Judging him. The old man removed his gloves slowly. "If you keep running," he called out, "the contractors kill you both before sunrise." A snowmobile engine growled somewhere above the canal. Close now. Very close. And somebody dropped into the drainage ditch behind them. Chapter 4. The man dropped into the drainage ditch hard and fast. White camouflage. Compact rifle already rising. Cole fired first from beneath the culvert. 2 suppressed shots cracked through the darkness. The attacker spun sideways into the ice wall before he could return fire. Above them, the spotlight beam snapped toward the gunfire instantly. Somebody shouted. "Contact in the canal." The ditch exploded with tracer fire. Ice shards sprayed through the culvert while rounds screamed overhead. Cole grabbed Volkov's sleeve. "Move." They crawled deeper through the concrete pipe while bullets hammered the entrance behind them. Freezing water soaked through Cole's gloves and knees. The culvert narrowed ahead before opening into another drainage trench running beneath the pipeline service road. Volkov crawled fast despite the blood soaking her jacket sleeve. Good pain tolerance. Necessary trait tonight. Behind them, boots crunched across the canal bank. Pursuit teams moving closer. The old agency man shouted from somewhere above. "Careful with the scientist." One contractor answered. "What about Walker?" A pause. Then, "Your call." Cole almost smiled in the darkness. Government subcontracting, murder. Modern efficiency. They emerged from the far end of the culvert into deeper snowfields beyond the checkpoint perimeter. No floodlights here. Only black wilderness and blowing snow beneath the endless pipeline. Volkov pointed north through the storm. "There's an old seismic road near the ridge." "You know the area?" "I worked here 6 months." "Doing what?" "Research." "That's a flexible word." She ignored the bait. Gunfire erupted behind them again, as agency operators and contractors continued shooting at each other around the checkpoint. Cole glanced back once. The spotlight beams cut through the storm wildly now, while vehicles repositioned around the utility station. Confusion spreading. Good. They pushed north through waist-deep snow, beneath the elevated pipeline supports. The wind intensified away from the road system. Open Arctic terrain offered no shelter. No sound except the storm and distant engines hunting through darkness behind them. Volkov finally spoke after several minutes. "You know the gray-haired man?" Cole kept moving. "No." "You lied badly." "Cold affects my honesty." She stopped beside a buried pipeline marker and stared at him through blowing snow. "You move like intelligence personnel." That insult hurts. "You know tactical pursuit patterns, weapon systems, escape routes." Cole adjusted the rifle sling. "You forgot my charming personality." Volkov almost smiled despite herself. Almost. Then snowmobile engines echoed nearby again. Closer than before. The contractors had broken off from the checkpoint fight and resumed the hunt. Cole scanned the terrain quickly. The pipeline corridor stretched north across rolling frozen hills, broken by abandoned drilling pads and utility structures half buried beneath drifts. Bad country for running. Excellent country for thermal imaging. He grabbed Volkov's arm and pulled her down behind a pressure mound of frozen earth beside the pipeline supports. Headlights swept across the snowfield moments later. 3 snowmobiles passed maybe 70 yards away, moving slow while riders scanned with thermal optics mounted beneath their helmets. Professional hunters. The lead rider stopped suddenly. Engine idling. Helmet turning slowly toward Cole's position. Thermals picking up heat through the snowbank, maybe. The rider keyed his radio. Cole saw the decision happen before the man spoke. They had them. Cole rose from cover and opened fire immediately. The lead rider flew backward off the snowmobile. The other 2 split formation fast and accelerated outward while firing into the darkness. Smart response. One rider flanked wide left, trying to pin them against the pipeline supports. The second stayed mobile centerline, spraying bursts through the drifting snow. Cole shoved Volkov downhill toward a shallow ravine cutting beneath the service corridor. Run. They slid down the icy embankment while rounds tore apart snowbanks overhead. The ravine offered partial cover from the thermal optics. Not enough. The flanking rider appeared suddenly above them along the ridge line. White camouflage, blending perfectly against the storm. The mercenary fired downward. Cole tackled Volkov sideways behind a frozen boulder as bullets shattered ice beside their heads. The rider accelerated down the slope, directly toward them. Aggressive. Confident. Cole waited until the machine closed within 20 feet. Then he fired once. The round punched through the snowmobile windshield and into the rider's face shield. The machine flipped violently end over end down the ravine. Fuel ignited instantly. Flames rolled through blowing snow. The remaining rider circled uphill, firing short controlled bursts toward the wreck. Pinning them. Waiting for reinforcements. Cole checked ammunition. Running lower than he liked. Volkov crouched beside him, breathing hard. They keep coming. Rich people finance persistence. She studied him carefully through drifting smoke from the burning snowmobile. You joke too much during gunfights. Alternative feels unhealthy. The surviving rider disappeared briefly beyond the ridge line. Repositioning. Cole listened carefully beneath the storm. No engine noise now. The mercenary had dismounted. Even worse. A shot cracked suddenly from above. Different weapon. Higher caliber. The remaining snowmobile exploded apart halfway up the ridge. Cole looked upward sharply. A dark figure stood atop the ridge line, holding a long rifle fitted with a suppressor. Heavy winter parka. Fur-lined hood. Female silhouette. The shooter waved once sharply toward the north. Move. Then she disappeared back into the storm. Volkov stared uphill. Who was that? No idea. You have many mysterious women shooting at your enemies. Apparently, Alaska offers excellent hospitality. More engines echoed behind them. Additional pursuit teams closing fast. Cole grabbed the surviving gear from the burning snowmobile wreck and pushed north again through the ravine. The terrain changed gradually as they climbed toward higher ground. Rock outcroppings emerged through the snow. Old utility poles leaned sideways from decades of storms. Then shapes appeared ahead through the whiteout. Buildings. Low concrete structures half buried beneath ice drifts. Rusted antenna towers. Cold War leftovers. Volkov slowed beside him. Radar station. Cole studied the abandoned installation. Broken fences circled the outer perimeter beneath heavy snowpack. Most structures looked collapsed or buried completely. One communications tower still stood crooked against the storm. No lights visible. No movement. Could be empty. Could be occupied. Could be mined. The female sniper suddenly emerged from the blowing snow near the entrance gate, carrying the long rifle low against her shoulder. Late 30s maybe. Weathered face. Native features. Calm eyes. She looked at Cole first. Then at Volkov. You two bring trouble like sled dogs bring fleas. Cole kept the rifle lowered, but ready. You shot the snowmobile. The woman shrugged. Annoyed me. Volkov stepped forward carefully. You know this place? I grew up near here. The woman glanced back toward the station. My father worked the radar site before the Soviets abandoned half this garbage. Cole frowned. The Soviets. Everybody spied up here. Americans. Russians. Oil companies. Same disease wearing different jackets. Engines echoed faintly through the storm behind them. Closing. The woman heard them too. You want warmth or philosophy? Decide fast. Cole looked toward the station entrance. You alone. For now. Not a comforting answer. The woman turned and walked toward the buried facility entrance without waiting for them. Cole and Volkov exchanged a look. Then followed her into the abandoned radar station while the storm swallowed the last daylight behind them. Chapter 5. The radar station smelled like diesel fuel, cold iron, and old water damage. Cole followed the woman through a rusted blast door half buried beneath drifting snow, while Volkov stayed close behind with the captured rifle tucked beneath her coat. The interior tunnel sloped downward beneath the frozen hillside. Emergency lights glowed dim amber along cracked concrete walls powered by aging generators somewhere deeper underground. So the place still had electricity. That usually meant one of two things. Somebody maintained it, or somebody occupied it. The woman stopped beside a steel security gate and punched a code into a battered keypad. The gate buzzed open reluctantly. You trust random strangers often? Cole asked. The woman glanced back at him. You don't look random. That hurts worse than the cold. She ignored him and continued deeper into the station. The lower level opened into a large operations chamber built during the Cold War. Massive radar consoles lined one wall beneath faded Cyrillic warning signs. Thick cables snaked across the ceiling overhead. Condensation dripped steadily from old ventilation pipes. A cast iron stove crackled near the center of the room beside stacked firewood and canned supplies. Definitely occupied. The woman removed her gloves and set the rifle against a steel cabinet. Door locks automatically behind you. Cole heard the blast door mechanisms engage somewhere above. Heavy sound. Very heavy sound. Volkov noticed it too. Comforting. The woman pointed toward a folding chair beside the stove. You're bleeding through your coat. Volkov finally sat. Exhaustion crept into her face now that movement stopped. Cole remained standing. The woman watched him carefully. People who keep pacing indoors usually expect betrayal. People who survive long enough learn patterns. That earned the first real smile from her. Small one. Gone quick. She opened a medical cabinet mounted near the wall and tossed supplies onto the table. Patch her up before she leaks on my floor. Cole crouched beside Volkov and cut away the damaged jacket sleeve carefully. Glass fragments had carved deep through the upper arm during the plane crash. Ugly wound. Not fatal yet. Volkov watched him disinfect the injury. You learned medicine too. I learned not dying. You answer every question sideways. Direct answers get expensive. She hissed slightly as he pulled another glass shard free. Still cheaper than Russian hospitals. The woman leaned against the radar console, lighting a cigarette. Name's Annie Vuk. Cole looked up briefly. Walker. I figured. You know me. Word travels north eventually. Volkov studied Annie carefully now. You helped us for a reason. Annie exhaled smoke toward the ceiling pipes. The men chasing you work for Arctic Extraction Solutions. Cole nodded once. Corporate contractors? No. Annie's face hardened. Corporate army. She walked toward a dusty map spread across one operations table. Pins and handwritten notes covered sections of the northern coastline and pipeline infrastructure. Cole moved closer. The map marked abandoned drilling sites, seismic survey zones, restricted ice roads, military communications stations. Annie tapped one location near the Arctic coast. 6 villages lost drinking water up here last winter after AES started deep extraction tests. Volkov looked sharply toward the map. How deep? Far enough to wake things beneath the permafrost. That changed Volkov's expression immediately. Cole caught it. You know something. Volkov stood slowly, despite the pain in her arm. The seismic surveys were not energy exploration. Annie folded her arms. Then what were they? Volkov stared at the old radar screens for a long second before answering. We discovered harmonic pressure faults beneath the Arctic shelf. Cole frowned. That sounds unpleasant. It means the ice structures beneath the ocean can be destabilized deliberately. Annie stopped smoking. Volkov continued. Controlled resonance waves. Underground pressure amplification. Triggered collapse points. Cole looked at her. You're talking about earthquakes? No. Volkov shook her head. Much worse. She walked toward the operations map and pointed toward Arctic shipping routes. The polar ice protects half the northern hemisphere's energy balance. Shipping lanes. Coastal stability. Ocean currents. Annie's expression darkened. You can melt it. Volkov looked sick, saying it aloud. Yes. Silence settled over the room, except for the ticking stove and distant wind outside the buried station walls. Cole finally spoke. And somebody wants that weaponized. Volkov laughed once without humor. Somebody already funded it. Annie crushed out her cigarette, hard against the console. Who? Volkov looked directly at Cole now. American contractors. Russian investors. Chinese mineral groups. European energy consortiums. Cole leaned against the operations table. Everybody joined hands for the apocalypse. Money creates friendships governments cannot. Annie opened a steel locker beside the radar equipment and removed a bottle of whiskey. Figures. She poured 3 metal cups without asking. Cole accepted his. Volkov took hers after a moment. The whiskey burned hard enough to wake nerves back to life. Outside, the storm intensified against the buried facility. Wind moaned through old ventilation shafts overhead. Then a faint electronic chirp echoed from deeper inside the radar station. Annie froze instantly. Not fear. Recognition. She grabbed the sniper rifle beside the cabinet. You touch anything downstairs? Cole shook his head. Volkov looked confused. Another chirp echoed through the station, followed by static crackling from somewhere below the operations level. Annie moved toward a secondary hallway near the communications room. Stay here. Cole followed anyway. The lower maintenance corridor sat darker than the main chamber. Half the ceiling lights had failed completely. Pipes dripped rusty water into grated floor drains, while old electrical wiring buzzed faintly behind concrete walls. The static grew louder as they approached a sealed steel door at the end of the corridor. Russian lettering stretched across the rusted surface. Annie stopped outside it. This room started making noise 3 weeks ago. Cole checked the rifle chamber. You open it. Twice. And nothing good. Volkov stepped beside them, staring at the markings on the door. Her face tightened instantly. What does it say? Cole asked. She translated quietly. Subsurface relay chamber. Annie unlocked the heavy door, with a ring of old keys hanging from her belt. The hinges groaned open. Cold air rolled out, carrying the smell of machine oil and old dust. Cole entered first with the rifle raised. The chamber beyond looked nothing like the abandoned radar systems upstairs. This equipment had power. Modern equipment. Fresh cables. Portable servers. Satellite uplink hardware. 3 massive drilling schematics glowed across digital monitors mounted along the far wall. Somebody had rebuilt the lower level recently. Volkov moved toward the screen slowly. No. Cole looked at the display. 3 offshore drilling sites marked across the Arctic shelf beneath Alaska. Each connected by wave pattern models and pressure mapping grids. Annie stared at the hardware. Who the hell installed all this? Volkov pointed toward a corporate logo stamped on one monitor casing. AES. Arctic Extraction Solutions. Cole stepped toward another monitor, displaying seismic data. Numbers rolled continuously across the screen. Live feeds. Current activity. Then one camera feed switched automatically. Security footage. A snow-covered exterior view of the radar station entrance. Vehicles emerging through the storm. Black trucks. Snowmobiles. Floodlights. Men unloading weapons. Annie cursed softly. They found us. The monitor zoomed tighter automatically. The gray-haired agency officer stepped from one of the trucks beside the AES executive from the checkpoint. Standing together now. No more pretending they opposed each other. Volkov stared at the screen. They worked together. Cole watched armed teams spreading around the buried radar complex in organized assault positions. Everybody works together until profit changes direction. The agency officer looked directly toward the exterior camera, then smiled slightly, as if he knew they were watching. A loud metallic thud echoed somewhere above them. Then another. Breach charges. The assault had started. Chapter 6. The first explosion shook dust from the ceiling pipes. The second blast killed half the lights inside the relay chamber. Emergency power kicked in a second later, flooding the underground station with dim red illumination. Annie moved fast. Faster than Cole expected. She crossed to a steel cabinet beside the server racks and yanked it open. Inside sat military crates stacked floor to ceiling. Rifles. Ammunition. Grenades. Claymore mines. Cole looked at her. You preparing for World War III? Annie grabbed extra magazines and shoved them into her coat pockets. Up here you either prepare or freeze. Another explosion thundered above them. Closer now. Metal screamed somewhere in the upper tunnel system. Volkov stared at the weapons cache. You expected them, eventually. Annie chambered around into the sniper rifle. I expected oil company security, not half the intelligence community. Cole checked the radar station layout mounted beside the operations console. Old Soviet architecture. Narrow choke points. Maintenance tunnels. Generator corridors. Defensible if you understood the layout. Deadly if you didn't. Voices echoed faintly through the upper levels now. Attack teams entering the station. Professional spacing. Disciplined movement. The contractors had numbers. Cole preferred terrain. He pointed toward the maintenance map. How many entrances? 3. Annie moved beside him. Main blast door. Ventilation tunnel. Old emergency escape shaft near the generator room. Which one would you use? The vent tunnel. Good. Cole grabbed 2 claymores from the crate. That means they'll use it too. Volkov picked up a compact rifle awkwardly with her injured arm. Cole noticed immediately. You ever fired one? In Siberia, everybody fires rifles. Comforting answer. The station lights flickered again. Then automatic gunfire erupted upstairs. Short bursts. Suppressed weapons. The assault teams had reached the operations level. Annie moved toward the corridor. They're fast. No, Cole said. They're trained. He handed Volkov an extra pistol magazine. Stay behind us. If shooting starts close, aim center mass and keep firing until they stop moving. Volkov looked insulted. I understand violence. Tonight everybody does. Another burst of gunfire cracked overhead, followed by breaking glass and shouted commands. English. Russian. Mixed teams now. Corporate contractors and intelligence operators hunting together. Cole hated that combination. Competent people with flexible ethics. They moved through the lower maintenance corridors beneath the radar station, while the sounds of the assault spread overhead. Steam drifted from aging pipes. The walls sweated condensation. Red emergency lights painted everything the color of fresh wounds. Annie stopped beside a grated service hatch and listened. Footsteps above them. Several men moving through the vent shafts. Cole crouched beside the hatch. Vent tunnel. Annie nodded. He armed the first claymore carefully and mounted it facing the shaft entrance beyond the next corridor bend. Not enough to collapse the tunnel. Enough to ruin somebody's evening. Voices echoed faintly through the metal ductwork overhead. One contractor spoke quietly. Thermals show movement lower level. Another answered. Take them alive if possible. Cole almost laughed. Possible, doing heavy lifting there. He motioned Annie and Volkov deeper into the maintenance system. The generator room sat near the lowest level of the buried station. Massive diesel engines rumbled behind steel safety cages, while old Soviet pressure gauges flickered beneath layers of dust. Heat rolled through the chamber. Good place to defend. Bad place for explosives. Annie pointed toward a narrow side tunnel. Emergency escape shaft connects there. Cole studied the rusted ladder, disappearing upward through darkness. Usable. Depends how much tetanus you enjoy. A metallic clang echoed behind them. Close now. One of the assault teams had entered the lower corridors. Cole killed the generator room lights instantly. Darkness swallowed the chamber, except for dim red emergency strips along the floor. He positioned Annie behind a maintenance console, overlooking the entrance corridor. Volkov crouched beside fuel drums near the escape tunnel. Cole moved into shadow behind one of the giant diesel generators. The footsteps approached carefully. Not rushing. Professionals expecting traps. A flashlight beam swept through the corridor entrance. Then another. 3 men entered the generator room, carrying suppressed carbines and thermal goggles. White winter camouflage. AES contractors. Lead operators scanned the darkness slowly. Heat signatures near the engines. Cole waited. The second operator moved toward the escape tunnel. The third drifted wider toward Annie's position. Bad angle. Annie fired first. The suppressed sniper round punched through the third man's chest and slammed him backward into the fuel drums. The room erupted instantly. Cole opened fire from behind the generator. The lead contractor spun sideways before he could react. The second dove behind machinery and returned controlled bursts through the darkness. Professional response again. Rounds sparked off engine housings around Cole's cover. Annie shifted position fast while chambering another sniper round. The surviving contractor heard the bolts cycle. He pivoted toward her. Cole moved before the man could fire. He crossed the gap between generators fast and slammed into the contractor hard enough to drive both men across the concrete floor. The rifle discharged wildly into the ceiling pipes. Steam exploded downward in a scalding white cloud. The contractor drove an elbow into Cole's ribs and clawed for a sidearm. Strong guy. Disciplined. Cole trapped the man's wrist against the floor and hammered repeated punches into his throat until resistance weakened. Then he snapped the contractor's head against the concrete once. Stillness. The steam cloud thickened through the generator room. Visibility vanished. Then gunfire erupted from the corridor again. Different shooters. More teams entering. Annie cursed from somewhere in the steam. They're pouring in. Cole grabbed the dead contractor's rifle and moved toward the corridor entrance. Flashlight beams cut through the steam cloud. 4 silhouettes advancing. Cole detonated the claymore remotely. The explosion ripped through the lower tunnel, hard enough to shake the station foundations. Concrete dust blasted through the corridor. Screams echoed beneath collapsing debris. Then silence. Short silence. After that came another sound. Heavy automatic fire from above. The assault teams upstairs had reached the relay chamber. Volkov emerged through the steam, clutching one of the portable server drives against her chest. Cole stared at it. You grabbed souvenirs? Her face tightened. These files matter. Everything tonight seems to matter. The station groaned suddenly. Deep structural vibration rolled through the lower levels. Annie looked upward sharply. They're breaching the upper supports. A radio crackled somewhere on one of the dead contractors. The gray-haired agency officer's voice drifted through static. Walker, you're outnumbered and buried underground with a wounded scientist. Cole picked up the radio. You forgot unstable architecture. A pause. Then the old man chuckled softly. I always liked you. That makes one of us. The agency officer ignored the jab. You don't understand what Volkov built. Cole looked toward the scientist. She says everybody funded it. Because every government fears losing the Arctic. The old man's calm voice echoed through the static. Shipping lanes. Energy reserves. Military positioning. Whoever controls the ice controls the century. Volkov stepped closer to the radio. You murdered civilians to hide your project. The old man answered immediately. No. We protected stability. Annie spat onto the concrete floor. People always say that before the graves pile up. The radio hissed briefly. Then, you have 10 minutes before this station collapses. Cole frowned. What did you wire? No answer came. Only static. Then the transmission ended. Annie looked toward the ceiling again. The station vibrated harder now. Dust drifted from support beams. Cole understood immediately. They planted charges. Volkov's face went pale. The lower seismic equipment. Cole grabbed her arm. What about it? Her voice tightened. The drilling systems beneath this station connected directly into the fault grid. Annie stared at her. You saying they'll bury the place? Volkov shook her head slowly. No. Another violent tremor rolled through the radar station. Somewhere above them, metal collapsed with a thunderous crash. Then warning alarms screamed alive throughout the underground complex. Volkov looked at Cole with real fear finally breaking through her calm. If those charges trigger the pressure lines beneath the station. She stopped. Cole already saw it in her face. The explosion above them suddenly felt much larger than demolition. Chapter 7. The floor lurched beneath them. Not vibration this time. Movement. Deep below the buried radar station, something shifted through the ice shelf with a sound like distant thunder rolling beneath the earth. The generator room lights flickered violently. One diesel engine exploded in a burst of steam and fire. Annie ducked instinctively behind the control console. What the hell did they hit? Volkov stared toward the concrete floor as another tremor rippled through the station. The pressure notes. Cole grabbed her shoulder. English. She pointed downward. The radar station sits above a dormant fault chamber connected to the Arctic shelf. Still not English. Another violent shudder rocked the room, hard enough to split one of the generator pipes. Scalding steam blasted sideways across the chamber. Volkov raised her voice over the alarms. The drilling systems amplify seismic resonance beneath the ice. Cole nodded once. There it is. Annie looked between them. You saying they're triggering earthquakes? No. Volkov's expression tightened. Controlled fractures. That sounds worse. It is. The walls groaned again. Then a loud metallic crack echoed from somewhere above them. Structural supports failing. Cole grabbed extra magazines from the dead contractors while Annie moved toward the escape tunnel ladder. We stay down here much longer, we get buried. Gunfire erupted upstairs again. Close now. One of the assault teams had survived the collapsed tunnel and pushed deeper into the station. Cole looked toward the corridor entrance. They're still coming. Of course they are, Annie snapped. These idiots probably think there's a bonus involved. Volkov clutched the server drive tighter against her chest. Cole noticed. You willing to die for that thing? Her answer came fast. Millions could. That shut the room quiet for half a second. Then the station shook again. A crack split across the generator room's ceiling. Concrete dust rained down. Cole pointed toward the escape shaft. We move. The ladder tunnel climbed vertically through old maintenance levels toward the surface. Rust coated the steel rungs. Cold air drifted downward, carrying snow and the distant howl of the storm above. Annie climbed first with the sniper rifle strapped across her back. Volkov followed slower because of the injured arm. Cole stayed below, covering the tunnel entrance. The footsteps reached the corridor outside moments later. Multiple men. Fast movement now. No more cautious clearing. The assault teams knew time mattered. Flashlight beams cut through the steam-filled generator room. Cole fired immediately. The first contractor pitched backward into the corridor. Another dropped beside the doorway and returned controlled bursts through the steam. Rounds slammed into the ladder shaft walls above Cole's head. Move faster, he shouted upward. Annie's voice echoed faintly from above. Working on it. A grenade bounced across the generator room floor. Cole saw it hit the concrete beside the shattered diesel housing. He dove into the ladder shaft and wrapped one arm around the steel rungs just as the grenade exploded below. The blast punched heat and pressure upward through the tunnel. Metal screamed. The ladder shook violently. Cole climbed hard. Below him, flames spread through the generator room while surviving contractors shouted orders through smoke. Another burst of gunfire chased him upward through the shaft. A round punched through his jacket sleeve. Close enough. The ladder tunnel emerged into a narrow maintenance room near the upper radar level. Snow blew through cracks in the ceiling. The entire station tilted slightly now. Bad sign. Annie crouched beside the exit hatch, aiming the sniper rifle downward toward the shaft opening. Volkov leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Cole slammed the hatch shut behind him. Anybody got better vacation ideas? Annie fired downward through the hatch grate. A scream echoed up the shaft. One less. The station groaned again. Somewhere outside, engines roared through the storm. Additional vehicles arriving. Cole crossed toward the upper communications room and looked through a shattered observation window. Floodlights surrounded the buried station now. Contractors. Agency operators. Snowmobiles. Even heavier trucks arriving from the pipeline road. Whole damn army for one scientist. Volkov stepped beside him carefully. They cannot get those files. Cole looked at the server drive in her hands. What exactly's on it? Field models. Pressure simulations. Fault mapping. Meaning if someone understands the calculations. She stopped herself. They can destabilize sections of the Arctic shelf deliberately. Annie snorted. Every rich idiot on Earth wants that. Cole studied the vehicles outside. No. They want leverage. He spotted the gray-haired agency officer standing beside the floodlights, speaking calmly into a radio while the storm hammered around him. No panic. No urgency. Man looked like he ordered wars between lunch meetings. Then another figure stepped from one of the trucks. Tall. Broad shoulders. Heavy winter combat gear. Russian. Even at this distance, the man carried himself differently than the contractors. Older. Dangerous. He wore no face covering, despite the cold. Scar across the jawline. Flat eyes. Annie saw him too. Ah, hell. Cole glanced toward her. You know him? Everybody up here knows him. The Russian surveyed the station through blowing snow, while mercenaries moved around him carefully. Not fearful. Respectful. Annie's voice lowered slightly. That's Viktor Saranov. Volkov's face lost color immediately. No. Cole looked between them. Who? Volkov answered quietly. He commanded special operations units in Chechnya during the collapse. Annie chambered another sniper round. People call him the Butcher of Chechnya. Saranov looked toward the shattered observation window, almost as if he heard them. Then he smiled faintly. Cole hated men who smiled before violence. The radio, on one of the dead contractors, crackled suddenly across the communications desk. Saranov's voice rolled through the static in heavily accented English. Walker. Cole picked up the radio slowly. Popular night for introductions. You killed 6 of my men. 7. 1 hit a pipeline support earlier. A brief silence. Then Saranov laughed softly. Real amusement. You have confidence. I have ammunition. Close enough. Outside, Saranov walked calmly toward the buried station entrance while snow whipped across his coat. You protect the scientist because they pay you. Cole glanced toward Volkov. No. Then why? Good question. Cole answered honestly. Your side keeps trying to kill me. Saranov smiled again through the observation window. Fair. The Russian stopped beside the floodlights. I offer a trade. Cole leaned against the broken console. Bad start already. You give me the scientist. I kill the Americans. Annie barked a laugh from across the room. Volkov looked disgusted. Cole answered. Tempting sales pitch. Saranov's expression hardened slightly. The station will collapse soon. You know this. Another tremor shook the upper levels, hard enough to shatter more ceiling concrete. Snow poured through widening cracks overhead. The buried radar station sounded sick now, like an old ship taking water. Cole checked the exterior terrain again through the broken window. Steep ice ridges north of the station. Open tundra east. Pipeline access roads south. Bad escape routes everywhere. Then he noticed something farther beyond the floodlights. Movement near the communications tower wreckage. Not contractors. Not agency personnel. A small tracked utility vehicle, partially concealed behind snowdrifts. Hidden escape transport maybe. Cole filed it away immediately. Saranov's voice crackled through the radio again. Walker. Still here. You know what happens if the ice fractures spread? Cole glanced toward Volkov. You tell me. The Russian looked almost thoughtful now. The Arctic shelf cracks. Shipping lanes collapse. Coastal flooding begins. Oil markets panic. Nations mobilize. Volkov stepped closer to the radio. You helped build the field arrays. Saranov looked toward the shattered station windows. I helped finance them. Cole stared at him. There it is. The Russian shrugged slightly. War changes. Resources remain. Then, automatic fire erupted suddenly outside the station perimeter. Not from the assault teams. Different direction. Different shooters. Floodlights exploded across the snowfield one by one. Contractors dove for cover. Agency operators spun toward the darkness, firing blindly into the storm. Saranov turned sharply toward the new attack. Annie moved beside the window, with the sniper rifle raised. Who the hell's shooting now? Cole watched dark figures emerge through the whiteout beyond the perimeter vehicles. More armed teams. Different gear. Different vehicles. The Arctic had officially become crowded. Chapter 8. Gunfire rolled across the snowfields outside the radar station. Heavy gunfire. Not warning shots. Not tactical probing. This sounded personal. Floodlights burst one after another around the buried facility, while tracers carved red streaks through the blizzard. Cole watched contractors dive behind vehicles as the new arrivals attacked from the eastern ridgelines. Different weapons. Different movement. These shooters advanced aggressively instead of holding positions. Saranov disappeared from the floodlight perimeter instantly. Professional reflex. The gray-haired agency officer vanished too. Men like that survived by avoiding windows. Annie worked the bolt on her sniper rifle and sighted through the shattered observation window. New boys got decent spacing. Cole moved beside her. Through the storm, he spotted dark armored vehicles crawling downhill from the ridges above the station. No markings. Tracked movement systems instead of tires. Military-grade cold-weather transports. One vehicle mounted a heavy machine gun, firing into the contractor positions below. AES Mercenaries answered with rockets. The snowfield erupted into explosions and burning fuel. Volkov stared through the broken glass. Who are they? Cole shook his head. Tonight. Could be anybody. The buried radar station groaned again. Another section of ceiling collapsed somewhere deeper inside the complex. Concrete dust drifted through the upper levels. The place had maybe minutes left before gravity won. Annie lowered the sniper rifle. We leave now or get buried with everybody else. Cole looked toward the hidden tracked vehicle near the communications wreckage outside. Still there. Untouched during the firefight. Somebody parked it carefully for escape. He pointed through the window. That machine gets us out. Annie squinted through the blowing snow. You planning to jog through a war zone? Alternative seems unhealthy. Volkov checked the magazine on her rifle awkwardly with the injured arm. Cole noticed again. "You lose that arm completely. I'm not carrying you." She looked at him flatly. "You mention carrying me often." Building emotional trust. Another explosion rocked the station hard, enough to crack the observation room floor tiles. Time over. Cole moved first. They descended through the collapsing maintenance corridor, while automatic fire thundered outside the buried station. Emergency lights flickered weakly overhead. The air smelled like dust, smoke, and ruptured diesel lines now. The whole structure sounded alive around them. Dying things made noise. At the lower exit hatch, Annie stopped abruptly and raised one fist. Cole froze instantly beside her. Voices outside. Russian. Close. Mercenaries, moving along the outer wall toward the station entrance. Probably Saranov's people, repositioning against the new attackers. Cole eased the hatch open slightly. 3 armed men crouched behind snow-covered concrete barriers, maybe 20 feet away. White camouflage. Suppressed rifles. Professional posture. One carried a radio backpack. Cole whispered, "You know Russian?" Volkov nodded. "What are they saying?" She listened briefly. They lost contact with Saranov. "Everybody having communication problems tonight." The radio operator suddenly turned toward the hatch. Bad timing. Cole burst through the exit fast and fired twice before the man could shout. The first mercenary collapsed backward into the snow. The second spun toward cover while raising his rifle. Annie dropped him with a sniper round through the chest. The third mercenary sprinted toward the communications wreckage, firing bursts wildly through the storm. Cole chased him. Snow hammered sideways across the ruined station perimeter, while tracer fire streaked overhead between the contractors and the new attack force beyond the ridges. The fleeing mercenary reached the wrecked tower supports and pivoted behind twisted steel. Cole slid behind an overturned fuel crate as bullets snapped through the blizzard toward him. Professional shooter. Short bursts. Disciplined. Cole grabbed a broken steel coupling from the snow and hurled it hard across the opposite side of the wreckage. The mercenary reacted instantly toward the sound. Cole rose and fired once. The man dropped beside the twisted tower supports. Still. Annie emerged beside him moments later, scanning the snowfield through the sniper scope. More coming. Headlights moved through the storm uphill. Additional mercenary teams converging on the station. Cole pointed toward the hidden tracked vehicle, partially concealed behind snowdrifts beyond the wreckage. Move. They crossed the open snowfield low and fast while the battle behind them intensified. The tracked machine sat tucked beneath collapsed antenna debris. Compact military utility transport. Russian design. Fresh fuel cans strapped along the rear compartment. Definitely escape transportation. Volkov climbed aboard first and stared at the control panel. Her expression changed immediately. "This belongs to Saranov." Cole started the engine. "Then he'll miss it." The vehicle rumbled alive beneath them. Diesel growl. Strong engine. Arctic tires reinforced with track chains. Annie climbed into the rear compartment while scanning the battlefield behind them. The contractors had regrouped near the perimeter trucks now. Heavy weapons opening up toward the eastern ridge attackers. The new force kept advancing through the storm anyway. Fearless or stupid. Sometimes same thing. Cole swung the tracked vehicle north away from the radar station, just as another massive explosion ripped through the buried complex behind them. The ground jumped beneath the vehicle. A section of the station roof collapsed inward completely. Snow and concrete erupted skyward. Then the entire hillside sagged. Volkov gripped the dashboard tightly. The pressure chambers. The snowfield behind them cracked with a deep booming sound. Not explosion. Movement. Cole glanced into the side mirror. A jagged fracture line ripped outward beneath the buried station, across the frozen tundra. Vehicles tilted sideways. Men scattered across the snow, screaming warnings. One contractor truck vanished nose first into the widening ice split. Then fire reached underground fuel lines. The night exploded behind them. Shockwaves rolled across the tundra. Burning debris launched into the storm, while the buried station disappeared beneath collapsing earth and fractured ice. Annie stared backward through the rear hatch. Jesus. Cole kept driving. Never trust buried Soviet architecture. The tracked vehicle bounced across frozen terrain north of the collapsing station, while the storm swallowed the fire behind them. No roads now. Only ice fields and scattered rock formations stretching into darkness. Volkov leaned against the side window, breathing carefully through pain. Cole glanced at her. You gonna explain why every government on Earth wants you dead? She looked out into the storm. I built predictive resonance models for Arctic shelf stability. Meaning? My work identified fault harmonics beneath the polar shelf. Cole waited. Volkov sighed slightly. In theory, controlled drilling pressure could destabilize ice formations and ocean currents. In theory. Yes. And in reality? Silence. Then, they tested it. Annie leaned forward from the rear compartment. Where? Volkov pointed north through the windshield. There. Cole followed her finger toward the darkness ahead. At first he saw nothing except blowing snow and endless frozen terrain. Then shapes emerged through the whiteout. Massive steel structures half buried in ice cliffs near the coastline. Submarine pens. Old Soviet architecture, again. Huge blast doors frozen into the rock face overlooking the Arctic Ocean. Cole slowed the vehicle. What is this place? Volkov stared at the abandoned facility with visible dread. Subsurface Base 12. Annie frowned. Never heard of it. You were not supposed to. Cole drove closer through the storm. The old submarine base stretched beneath towering ice walls along the frozen coastline. Cranes rusted beneath snowdrifts. Collapsed radar domes leaned sideways above buried bunkers. Faded Soviet naval insignia still clung to concrete walls blasted raw by decades of Arctic storms. Dead place. Cold place. But not abandoned. Fresh tire tracks crossed the snow leading toward one of the submarine hangars. Cole saw them immediately. So did Annie. Volkov's face tightened. They reopened the facility. Cole stopped the vehicle behind a snow-covered fuel bunker and killed the engine. The wind howled across the frozen coastline. Far below the cliffs, black Arctic water crashed against broken sea ice. Annie chambered around quietly. You know what they kept down there? Volkov looked toward the dark submarine pens. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. The first field generator. Chapter 9. The submarine base crouched beneath the cliffs like something waiting to wake up. Cole studied the frozen facility through drifting snow while the tracked vehicle engine ticked softly behind them. The storm had eased slightly near the coastline. Enough visibility now to see. Rusted crane towers. Collapsed radar dishes. Concrete bunkers buried in ice. Massive submarine doors frozen half open along the cliff face. Soviet engineers built places with paranoia and concrete. This place had both in bulk. Annie crouched beside the fuel bunker and sighted through the sniper scope. Tracks are fresh. Cole nodded. The tire marks leading into the main hangar looked recent enough to still hold sharp edges despite the wind. Heavy vehicles. Multiple trips. Volkov stared at the submarine pens with visible tension tightening her face. You worked here? No. Then why the panic? She hesitated. Because the Soviets built the first resonance prototypes inside Arctic naval facilities. Annie glanced sideways at her. Why hide earthquake machines in submarine bases? Volkov shook her head. Not earthquakes. Pressure harmonics. Cole looked at her flatly. You keep changing the vocabulary. Problem still sounds terrible. A low metallic groan echoed from somewhere deep inside the cliffs. The sound rolled outward across the frozen shoreline beneath the wind. Machinery. Active machinery. Cole checked the sky instinctively. Cloud cover thick. No stars. No moonlight. Good conditions for hidden operations. Bad conditions if helicopters arrived. Annie moved toward the hangar perimeter carefully. Place feels occupied. Because it is, Cole said. He pointed toward the nearest watchtower. Fresh cigarette ember glowing briefly through the snow. Guard position. The ember vanished immediately after. Professional enough to avoid light discipline mistakes twice. Cole crouched lower beside the bunker. How many? Annie worked the scope slowly across the facility. 2 towers. Maybe 6 outside patrols. Hard to tell through the weather. Volkov pointed toward a smaller maintenance tunnel branching beneath the cliffside. That route bypasses the primary security corridor. Cole looked at her. You know the floor plan. I reviewed archive schematics years ago. Useful detail to mention earlier. She ignored that. The maintenance tunnel sat half buried beneath drifted snow, 50 yards from the main submarine doors. No lights. No visible guards. Which usually meant abandoned. Trapped. Watched remotely. Cole preferred abandoned. He never got abandoned. They crossed the snowfield low and careful while the Arctic wind shoved ice crystals across the shoreline hard enough to sting exposed skin. The closer they moved toward the cliffside, the more the base revealed itself beneath the storm. The submarine hangars stretched deep into the rock face like giant concrete caverns. Massive blast rails lined the frozen dock systems where Soviet submarines once loaded weapons beneath the Arctic shelf. Most of the old military markings had faded. New markings replaced some of them. AES logos. Corporate ownership tags. That explained plenty. Annie brushed snow from the maintenance hatch. Fresh scrape marks beneath the ice. Recently opened. Cole grabbed the rusted wheel lock and turned slowly. The hatch opened with a low grinding sound. Cold air drifted out carrying machine oil, ozone and stale recycled heat. Occupied. They descended metal stairs into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered weakly along the tunnel walls. Not Soviet lighting. Modern LEDs mounted beside older wiring. AES had renovated sections of the base recently. Volkov moved slowly now. Not fear exactly. Memory maybe. Cole watched her carefully. You're seeing something. She nodded once. The original field generator required enormous pressure containment systems. Naval reactor facilities offered enough infrastructure. Annie snorted softly behind them. Only governments would build apocalypse machines under the ocean and call it infrastructure. The tunnel opened into a long service corridor running beneath the submarine docks. Half the overhead lights had failed. Steam drifted from heating pipes. Old Soviet warning posters peeled from the walls, beside fresh computer terminals mounted near reinforced doors. Past and present stitched together ugly. Then Cole saw the bodies. 3 men frozen into the corridor floor, near a collapsed blast door. Old uniforms. Soviet naval personnel. Ice preserved them almost perfectly. One still clutched a pistol. Another had claw marks frozen into his face shield. Annie stopped cold beside them. What happened here? Volkov stared at the corpses silently. Cole crouched near the nearest body. No bullet wounds. No burns. Just terror locked permanently into frozen expressions. The blast door beside them looked warped outward from the inside, as if something had tried escaping. Cole rose slowly. I officially dislike this place. A distant metallic bang echoed somewhere deeper in the base. Current movement. Not ghosts. Annie raised the sniper rifle. That didn't sound friendly. Voices drifted faintly through the lower corridors ahead. English. American accents. Cole motioned them forward. They advanced carefully through the submarine facility, while the sounds of machinery vibrated through the cliff walls around them. The deeper levels looked far more modern than the outer tunnels. Portable servers lined equipment bays. Satellite communication arrays blinked softly beside seismic monitoring stations. Huge drilling schematics glowed across digital displays mounted above the old submarine docks. AES had turned the Soviet base into an operational research center. Volkov stopped beside one monitor. Her face tightened instantly. Cole moved beside her. The display showed Arctic shelf pressure maps with dozens of blinking fault markers stretching across the polar coastline. Several markers flashed red. Active test zones. Then another screen caught his attention. Financial records. Transfer routes. Corporate accounts. Government shell companies. Payment authorizations tied to energy firms, defense contractors, and intelligence subcontractors. Every major flag on Earth appeared somewhere in the records. Annie stared at the display. Everybody bought in. Volkov nodded grimly. The Arctic shelf becomes unstable. Entire shipping economies collapse. Energy prices surge. Governments panic. Cole scrolled through another file. Private military expenditures. Assassination authorizations. Civilian casualty reports buried beneath security classifications. Same old song. Just colder scenery. Then a photograph appeared on one monitor. Cole stopped moving. The image showed a formal dinner meeting somewhere expensive. Politicians. Energy executives. Military officials. And standing beside them, smiling calmly at the camera, the gray-haired agency officer from the radar station. Next to him stood Viktor Saranov. Partners. Not rivals. Volkov saw it too. They financed the project together. Cole studied the timestamp. 8 years earlier. Long operation. Long conspiracy. Then Annie hissed sharply from the corridor entrance. Movement. Cole killed the monitor brightness instantly. Voices approached from the lower dock levels. Several men. Armed. One voice carried authority. American. Pressure readings spiked after the station collapse. Another answered in Russian. Saranov wants the generator relocated before daylight. Cole motioned everyone behind an abandoned equipment cart near the submarine rail system. 2 AES contractors entered the corridor carrying rifles and tablet computers. Behind them walked a heavy-set executive wearing a black insulated coat with AES security credentials clipped to his chest. Corporate type. Soft hands. Hard eyes. The executive studied the monitors impatiently. Where's the archive package? One contractor answered. Still transferring from the lower vault. The executive shook his head. We should have destroyed this facility weeks ago. Cole listened carefully. The contractor lowered his voice. What about the Americans? They'll clean their own records. The executive smirked slightly. They always do. Then the overhead lights flickered once. Twice. A low warning tone echoed through the submarine base. The executive frowned. What now? One of the contractors checked a tablet. Thermal signatures above the western cliff. Cole felt it immediately. The room changed. Professional tension. Outside threat. The contractor looked up from the screen. Aircraft inbound. Annie cursed softly under her breath. Cole moved toward the nearest observation slit, overlooking the frozen coastline outside. Black shapes emerged through the storm clouds above the Arctic water. 3 helicopters. No running lights. Low altitude. Fast. Military-grade stealth transports. And every gun mounted beneath them, pointed directly at the submarine base. Chapter 10. The helicopters came in low, over the Arctic water. No navigation lights. No markings. Black shapes cutting through the storm like sharks beneath dark water. Cole counted 3. Heavy transports. Side-mounted weapon systems. Fast enough to mean military. Expensive enough to mean government. The AES executive saw them through the observation slit and went pale immediately. That's impossible. One contractor grabbed his radio. We got inbound aircraft approaching from Sector West. The first helicopter opened fire before the warning finished. The submarine base shook violently as cannon rounds hammered the outer cliff defenses. Concrete exploded outward from the dock entrance. Warning sirens screamed alive throughout the facility. The executive snapped toward his men. Seal the lower vault. Cole moved instantly. Chaos created openings. He motioned Annie and Volkov toward the maintenance stairs descending deeper into the submarine pens. The helicopters strafed the base again. Explosions rolled through the cliffside corridors, hard enough to flicker the lights. Dust and ice poured from the ceiling overhead. One AES contractor stumbled sideways near the monitor stations. Cole grabbed him before the man understood what happened and slammed him headfirst into the equipment rack. The second contractor spun toward the movement. Annie dropped him with a suppressed round through the throat. The executive bolted for the lower corridor immediately. Smartest thing he'd done tonight. Cole chased him. The submarine rail tunnel sloped downward, beneath massive concrete arches toward the lower dock chambers. Emergency lights flashed red across wet steel floors while klaxons echoed through the base. The executive ran hard despite his size. Fear improved cardio. Ahead, armored blast doors began closing slowly over the lower vault entrance. The executive sprinted toward the narrowing gap. Cole fired once. The round punched through the executive's calf. The man crashed hard across the slick steel floor, screaming. One of the blast doors jammed halfway closed from the impact. Lucky break. Cole reached the executive first and dragged him away from the narrowing entrance. The man clawed desperately toward the vault. You don't understand what's down there. Cole shoved him against the wall. That sentence gets overused around me. Volkov arrived beside them, breathing hard. She stared toward the partially sealed vault. The generator chamber. The executive looked up sharply at her. You built the calibration models. Then you murdered entire villages testing them. The man sneered through the pain. Sacrifices happen. Annie stepped into the corridor behind them and drove the rifle stock across the executive's mouth hard enough to spray blood against the concrete wall. Try another answer. Before he could respond, automatic gunfire erupted from the upper tunnel behind them. AES security teams retreating downward. And something else. The helicopters had deployed assault teams inside the base. Different weapons now. Different voices. One shouted in clipped English, "Secure the dock levels." Another answered in French, "Mercenaries. International operators." Cole laughed once quietly. "What's funny?" Annie asked. "Whole world came shopping tonight." The executive spat blood onto the floor. "You're all already dead." Cole crouched beside him. "Then relax." Another explosion rocked the base. This one deeper. The steel beneath their boots vibrated with a low humming resonance. Volkov heard it too. Her face tightened instantly. The field generator activated. The executive smiled through broken teeth. Failsafe system. Cole looked toward the vault entrance. What happens now? The executive's eyes drifted toward the floor beneath them. The pressure cycle starts. Annie frowned. That means what? Volkov answered quietly. It means the system begins pulling resonance energy through the shelf fault lines. Cole stared at her. Still sounds terrible. She looked directly at him now. If the cycle stabilizes, the Arctic shelf fractures permanently. Silence. Then, well, that seems bad. The executive laughed weakly. You think governments will stop this now? Blood ran from his split mouth. Every nation here wants the same thing. Cole grabbed the man's coat and hauled him upward. Where's the shutdown? The executive's smile faded slightly. There isn't one. Cole hit him hard. The executive collapsed sideways against the wall. Annie checked the upper tunnel. We got incoming. Shadowy figures emerged through the smoke-filled corridor above. 3 operators in black cold weather gear, advancing with suppressed carbines and thermal optics. Not AES. Not agency. The lead operator spotted them instantly. Weapons came up. Cole fired first. The corridor erupted into close-range violence. The lead attacker dropped immediately. The second operator dove behind the rail supports and returned controlled bursts through the smoke. Professional team. Annie fired from cover near the blast door controls, while Volkov dragged the wounded executive behind a steel support pillar. Rounds sparked off concrete around them. The third operator flanked wide through the maintenance catwalks above the dock tunnel. Cole saw the movement overhead and rolled sideways just before bullets hammered his previous position. Bad angle. The operator above had elevation and cover. Cole grabbed a loose emergency fire canister mounted beside the tunnel wall and hurled it upward toward the catwalk. The operator leaned instinctively away from the object. Annie shot him through the chest mid-movement. The body crashed through the railing and slammed onto the dock floor below. The surviving attacker retreated upward through the smoke. Not panicked. Disciplined withdrawal. Cole hated disciplined people. The executive coughed blood behind the support pillar. You can't stop it now. Volkov crouched beside him. How long until full resonance? The executive looked at her. 40 minutes. Annie stared. That all? Volkov's expression hardened. At full cycle, the pressure waves destabilized the shelf edges. Cole pointed toward the vault. So we blow up the generator. The executive laughed again. That chamber sits beneath 40 feet of reinforced concrete. Then we improvise. A new sound rolled through the submarine base. Heavy metallic impacts. Not gunfire. Dock clamps. Cole moved toward the lower observation platform overlooking the submarine pens. The massive underground harbor stretched beneath the cliffside like a frozen cathedral. Steel cranes hung above black seawater, slamming against the dock walls far below. And sitting inside the largest submerged pen. A submarine. Modern. Black hull. Russian design. Floodlights, illuminated workers loading large cylindrical equipment containers through the open missile bay. Volkov stared at it. No. Cole looked at her. What now? The mobile generator. Annie joined them at the railing. You telling me they mounted this thing on a submarine? Volkov nodded slowly. They're evacuating the field core before the station collapses. Below them, armed teams moved frantically around the submarine dock while additional helicopters thundered overhead through the open cliffside entrance. One of the helicopter teams fast-roped operators directly onto the dock platforms. Gunfire exploded immediately between competing forces below. The whole submarine pen turned into a war zone. AES contractors, foreign mercenaries, agency shooters, Russian operators. Everybody fighting, everybody now. And in the middle of it sat the submarine, holding the one machine capable of destabilizing half the Arctic. Cole looked at the dock systems carefully. Crane rails, fuel lines, submarine access bridges. Then he spotted the maintenance tram descending toward the lower docks along the cliffside rail system. Old Soviet transport. Still powered. Still moving. Annie followed his eyes. Oh no. Cole checked the magazine in his rifle. Oh yes. Volkov looked at him like he'd lost his mind. You cannot board that submarine. Probably true. It's suicide. Cole stepped toward the tram platform while explosions rolled across the dockyard below. I've had worse travel plans. Chapter 11. The maintenance tram rattled down the cliffside rails toward the submarine docks. Old Soviet machinery complained the whole way. Steel wheels screeched. Loose bolts shook through the frame. Wind blasted through the open tram cage, carrying saltwater spray and drifting snow up from the harbor below. Cole crouched behind the tram controls, watching the chaos spread across the underground dockyard. Gunfire flashed everywhere now. Foreign operators repelled from helicopters overhead, while AES contractors fired from catwalk positions above the submarine pens. The Russian submarine crew kept loading equipment anyway. Disciplined men. Mission-first men. The kind who kept working while the world burned around them. Annie sat opposite Cole, with the sniper rifle braced across one knee. You really got a plan? Cole watched tracer rounds streak across the cavern. No. Excellent. Volkov leaned against the tram railing, clutching the server drive beneath her coat. The red emergency lights from the harbor reflected off her face in hard shadows. You cannot let the submarine leave. Cole glanced at her. I gathered that from the apocalypse speeches. Her eyes stayed locked on the black submarine below. If the generator reaches open water, nobody can stop them. The tram rounded the final curve overlooking the docks. The submarine sat moored beside the central loading platform beneath massive overhead cranes. Long black hull. Ice coating the upper deck. Russian naval markings, painted over recently with civilian shipping identifiers. Fake identity. Common trick. Containers the size of small trucks sat lined up beside the missile bay hatch, while armed workers rushed equipment aboard. The mobile field generator probably sat inside one of them. Cole counted security positions quickly. Sniper teams on the upper gantries. Heavy weapons near the fuel pumps. Patrols moving along the dock rails. Operators covering the submarine access bridge. Too many. Then the helicopters attacked again. One transport drifted low across the submarine pen and unleashed machine gun fire into the dock positions. Concrete exploded around the loading crews. Workers scattered. Russian operators returned fire from the submarine deck. The cavern filled with ricochets and screaming metal. Cole pointed toward the loading bridge. During infusion, Annie sighed. That phrase gets people buried. The tram reached the lower maintenance platform, hard enough to jolt everyone sideways. Cole jumped off first. Cold seawater slammed against the lower dock walls, maybe 30 feet below the steel platform. The submarine loomed enormous now. Black hull stretching through drifting steam and gun smoke, like some prehistoric thing surfacing from the deep. Annie covered the catwalk approaches, while Cole moved toward a row of abandoned fuel drums beside the loading cranes. Volkov followed close behind, despite the injured arm. A burst of gunfire cracked overhead. One helicopter spun wildly above the submarine pen, trailing smoke from the engine housing. Russian operators hammered it with concentrated fire from the dock towers. The helicopter clipped a crane cable and exploded against the far cavern wall in a rolling fireball. Burning debris rained into the water below. Nobody stopped fighting. Cole peeked around the fuel drums toward the submarine access bridge. 4 guards. Professional spacing. 1 heavy machine gun covering the dock approach. Difficult angle. Annie studied them through the scope. I can drop 2 before they react. Then we improvise. That word again. A nearby explosion shook the dock platform. The overhead crane system lurched violently. 1 suspended cargo container snapped loose from its support cable and swung wildly across the loading zone. Russian sailors scattered. The heavy machine gun crew turned instinctively toward the falling container. Cole moved immediately. He sprinted low across the dock, while Annie fired suppressed shots behind him. 2 guards dropped before the others understood the attack direction. The remaining operators opened fire. Rounds tore sparks from the steel dock around Cole's boots. He slid behind a loading tractor beside the submarine bridge, while bullets shattered the windshield overhead. Volkov reached cover behind stacked fuel crates. Annie stayed farther back on the maintenance platform, providing overwatch. 1 surviving guard advanced aggressively toward Cole's position. Russian special operations. Fast movement. Tight weapon control. Cole waited until the man rounded the loading tractor. Then drove the rifle muzzle sideways and fired point blank through the operator's body armor seam. The Russian collapsed across the wet steel grating. The final guard swung the machine gun toward Cole. Annie shot him through the side of the head before he could fire. Silence hit briefly. Rare thing tonight. Cole grabbed the dead operator's access badge and crossed the submarine bridge fast. The deck crew had shifted focus toward the helicopter assault overhead. Nobody expected attackers from inside the dockyard. Good. Cole preferred surprises. The submarine deck smelled like diesel fuel, machine oil, and seawater. Russian sailors sprinted between loading stations, while officers shouted commands through the chaos. The missile bay hatch stood open midship. Huge cylindrical containment units rested inside the loading compartment, beneath crane supports and portable generators. 1 container sat isolated near the center cradle, surrounded by armed technicians. Different security. Higher priority. Volkov emerged onto the deck behind Cole and froze when she saw the container. That's it. Cole studied the reinforced cylinder. Black steel. Cooling lines. Seismic warning labels. Looked expensive and unstable. Excellent combination. Then a calm voice spoke behind them. You really are difficult to kill. Cole turned. Viktor Saranov stood near the submarine tower, holding a compact rifle low across his chest. Snow drifted through the open dock cavern behind him, while Russian operators spread quietly across the upper deck positions. Not rushing. Not nervous. The butcher of Chechnya looked almost amused. Annie moved onto the bridge platform behind Cole, with the sniper rifle raised. Saranov saw her immediately. "Careful with that rifle," he said calmly. "One stray round, and we all become weather patterns." Cole glanced toward the generator container. Encouraging design flaw. Saranov stepped closer across the submarine deck. Around them, the battle inside the cavern continued raging between helicopters, mercenaries, and contractors. But this section of the dock had gone strangely still. Everybody waiting. Volkov stared at Saranov with open hatred now. "You murdered my team in Murmansk." Saranov nodded once. "They sold information. You sold the world." The Russian shrugged slightly. "The world buys eagerly." Cole kept his rifle trained center mass. "You planning a speech, or a surrender?" Saranov smiled faintly. "You think small, Walker." The Russian gestured toward the generator container. "Energy dependence rules nations. Climate fear rules populations. Whoever controls instability controls policy." Annie muttered from behind the scope. "There's the Bond villain part." Saranov ignored her. "The Arctic will become the new battlefield of the century." Cole looked around the burning dockyard. "Seems crowded already." A deep metallic alarm suddenly echoed through the submarine. One of the Russian officers shouted urgently in the background. Saranov's expression shifted slightly for the first time. Concern. Then Cole heard it too. A low grinding vibration beneath the submarine hull. Volkov looked toward the black water surrounding the dock. Her face drained white. The pressure waves reached the coastline. The cavern floor trembled hard enough to shake loose ice from the ceiling supports. Water surged violently against the dock walls below. Saranov looked toward the harbor sensors near the control tower. One technician shouted something in Russian. Panic this time. Real panic. Cole didn't know the language. Didn't need to. The submarine shifted suddenly against its mooring lines. Outside beyond the cavern mouth, the Arctic Ocean roared like something enormous had started moving beneath the ice shelf. Then one of the dock workers screamed and pointed toward the water. A crack split across the harbor surface. Chapter 12. The harbor ice split apart with a sound like artillery fire. Black seawater surged upward through the widening fracture beneath the submarine dock. Workers stumbled across the steel platforms, screaming warnings in Russian, while alarms howled throughout the cavern. The submarine's mooring cables snapped, one after another. Steel whips cracked through the air hard enough to cut a dock worker in half. Cole hit the deck instinctively as the severed cable screamed over his head. The submarine lurched sideways against the loading platform. Sailors scattered. One crane collapsed into the water below. Saranov never moved. The Russian stood near the tower, watching the harbor fracture spread across the cavern mouth with cold interest in his eyes. Volkov stared at the water in horror. The resonance field reached critical pressure. Cole rose behind the loading tractor. Meaning? The shelf destabilization already started. That answer keeps getting worse. Another violent tremor rolled through the dock. The submarine shifted again. This time, the entire harbor floor moved beneath it. A fuel truck slid sideways into the black water below. Gone instantly. Then gunfire exploded across the deck. One of the helicopter assault teams finally breached the submarine perimeter from the upper gantries. Operators in black tactical gear fast-roped directly onto the dock cranes while firing suppressed carbines into the Russian positions. Chaos detonated instantly. Russian sailors returned fire from behind missile loading equipment. AES contractors joined from the lower catwalks. Nobody controlled anything anymore. Cole grabbed Volkov and shoved her behind the missile cradle as rounds shredded steel around them. Annie fired from the bridge platform above, dropping one operator crossing the crane rail. Saranov disappeared into the firefight like smoke. Professional predators knew when conversations ended. Cole peeked over the loading cradle. The generator container still sat exposed near the open missile bay. 2 Russian technicians tried securing it while gunfire ripped across the deck around them. One technician took rounds through the back and collapsed across the control panel. The second dove for cover. Cole saw opportunity. Bad sign. He sprinted toward the generator cradle through smoke and tracer fire. Bullets snapped past his coat while explosions echoed through the cavern overhead. One helicopter drifted low across the harbor mouth, firing rockets into the dock defenses. The blast wave knocked Cole sideways against the submarine hull. The deck tilted sharply beneath him. Water surged violently against the steel pens below. Volkov reached the loading platform behind him, clutching the server drive beneath her coat. "You cannot damage the containment shell." Cole looked at the giant black cylinder. "Then tonight gets complicated." The container hummed now. Low vibration. Like a giant electrical transformer buried underground. The sound crawled through the deck plating into Cole's boots. A live sound. Wrong sound. Annie slid down the access ladder onto the submarine deck beside them. "We got company." 3 black-clad operators advanced across the forward deck using the submarine tower for cover. No insignia. Military movement. One carried a compact launcher strapped beneath the rifle barrel. Cole fired first. The lead attacker dropped behind the tower railing, while the others split wide immediately. Excellent training. Annie engaged the left side operator with the sniper rifle. The round punched through his shoulder and spun him across the deck. The third attacker fired the launcher. The grenade slammed into the loading crane beside the missile bay. Explosion. Steel cables snapped overhead. The crane arm collapsed downward toward the generator cradle. Volkov screamed something in Russian. Cole tackled her sideways as the massive steel beam crashed across the deck where they stood seconds earlier. The submarine rocked violently again. One side of the harbor wall cracked open beneath the pressure waves. Black seawater exploded through the fissure, flooding the lower maintenance docks. The cavern shook like an earthquake now. Saranov emerged near the submarine tower, firing controlled bursts at the assault operators while moving toward the generator cradle. Not retreating. Protecting it. Cole saw the priority immediately. He grabbed a dead technician's access tablet from the deck and tossed it toward Volkov. "You shut it down." She looked at the display briefly. "No." Excellent consistency. The surviving black-clad operators regrouped near the forward missile hatch, while Russian sailors closed from the aft section. Crossfire forming. Cole dragged Volkov behind the collapsed crane assembly as bullets sparked across the submarine hull. Annie kept firing from partial cover near the tower ladder. Then her rifle stopped. Empty. One operator rushed her position instantly. "Fast guy." Knife already out. Cole fired twice through the crane wreckage. The operator stumbled sideways and disappeared over the deck rail into the freezing harbor below. Annie chambered fresh rounds calmly. "Appreciated. You can buy lunch later." Volkov worked furiously across the access tablet now. Russian warnings flashed across the screen. Pressure graphs climbing higher. Then her expression changed. Fear again. Real fear. The field core is cycling automatically. Cole looked at the humming generator container. How long? She swallowed hard. 23 minutes until full harmonic release. The submarine lights flickered. Then all power died for one terrifying second. Darkness swallowed the cavern. Only gunfire flashes lit the dockyard. Emergency power slammed back on immediately afterward. Red lighting flooded the harbor. And something huge moved beneath the water. The submarine lifted suddenly against the mooring lines. Not from waves. From below. The black water in the dock pen churned violently near the fractured harbor floor. Dock workers screamed and backed away from the edge. One Russian sailor slipped on the ice-coated deck and vanished into the water. He surfaced once, then disappeared violently beneath the foam. Cole stared at the harbor. What the hell was that? Volkov looked pale beneath the red emergency lights. The resonance field destabilizes pressure layers beneath the shelf. That still explains nothing. She pointed toward the boiling water. The seabed is collapsing. Then a section of the harbor floor gave way entirely. The cavern thundered as concrete, steel, and seawater collapsed downward into darkness beneath the submarine base. One entire dock platform sheared off and vanished into the chasm. Russian sailors ran for higher ground, while containers slid screaming into the collapsing harbor. The submarine tilted hard portside. Saranov shouted commands in Russian from the tower deck. His remaining operators rushed toward the bridge hatch. Retreat plan. The Russian intended to take the submarine out before the harbor collapsed completely. Cole saw it happen in real time. So did Volkov. If he launches with the generator, she said. I know. Annie looked toward the cavern mouth. Can the sub even clear the harbor? Another violent crack split through the ice cliffs outside. The Arctic Ocean beyond the base surged wildly through widening fractures across the coastline. Cole looked at the collapsing dock systems around them. Then, at the generator container. Then at the submarine tower. He spotted the emergency ballast controls, mounted beside the loading crane systems. Old Soviet engineering. Manual overrides. Big red handles. Always appreciated simplicity. Cole pointed toward the ballast station. What happens if a submarine loses trim control inside a collapsing harbor? Annie followed his eyes, then smiled slowly for the first time all night. Now that, she said, sounds unhealthy. Chapter 13. The submarine groaned like a wounded animal beneath their boots. Steel screamed somewhere deep inside the hull, while seawater surged through the collapsing harbor around the dock platforms. Cole sprinted toward the ballast control station beside the loading cranes with Annie close behind him. Gunfire cracked across the submarine deck. Russian sailors fired toward the helicopter teams descending from the upper gantries, while AES contractors tried reaching the missile bay through the confusion. Nobody controlled the fight anymore. The Arctic had turned feral. Volkov crouched behind the collapsed crane assembly, working furiously on the access tablet, while the generator container hummed louder beside her. The vibration crawled through the deck plating now. Faster rhythm. Like a machine building pressure. Cole reached the ballast controls and wiped ice from the rusted emergency panel. Old Soviet labels. Manual override wheels. Pressure gauges twitching violently behind cracked glass. Annie peered over the railing toward the harbor water below. You really know submarines? No. Comforting trend tonight. Cole grabbed the largest valve wheel and tested it. Stuck. He planted one boot against the panel and hauled harder. The wheel broke loose with a metallic shriek. Deep inside the submarine, something massive shifted. Warning alarms exploded across the vessel immediately. Russian voices shouted from the tower deck. Saranov spun toward the ballast station. For the first time all night, real anger crossed his face. Good. Cole turned the wheel harder. The submarine tilted suddenly starboard. Loose equipment slid across the deck. One loading container smashed through the safety railing, and plunged into the black harbor water below. The entire dockyard erupted into chaos. Russian sailors scrambled toward emergency stations while the submarine's engines roared unevenly beneath the hull. Saranov raised his rifle toward Cole. Annie fired first. The sniper round shattered against the tower railing, inches from Saranov's head. The Russian vanished behind cover instantly. Cole spun the ballast wheel again. The submarine lurched harder this time. Water surged across the deck in icy waves. Then the harbor floor collapsed beneath the aft docking supports. Concrete vanished into darkness. One entire section of the submarine pen tore loose and dropped into the widening chasm beneath the base. The submarine slammed sideways against the loading pylons, hard enough to throw men off their feet. Cole hit the deck beside the ballast controls as steel cables snapped overhead. A Russian sailor cartwheeled screaming into the collapsing harbor. Gone. Annie grabbed the rail and looked down into the widening fracture beneath the dock. Jesus Christ. Cole followed her eyes. The harbor floor had split open completely. Not a crack anymore. A canyon. Black seawater poured downward into the earth beneath the submarine base, while sections of concrete collapsed into the depths. Far below, orange firelight flickered through rising steam. Something deep underground had ruptured. The field generator hummed louder. Volkov looked up sharply from the access tablet. The resonance cycle accelerated. Cole shouted back. Is that bad? Yes. Specificity appreciated. A helicopter roared low across the cavern mouth, firing rockets toward the submarine tower. The blast ripped apart the upper control platform. Russian operators scattered through smoke and debris. One helicopter clipped the hanging crane cables and spun sideways into the harbor wall. The explosion shook the entire cavern, hard enough to drop chunks of ice from the ceiling the size of trucks. One smashed through the dock bridge near Volkov's position. The scientist barely rolled clear before the steel platform collapsed into the water. Cole sprinted toward her, while bullets snapped across the deck from the remaining Russian positions. Saranov emerged through smoke near the missile bay, carrying a compact submachine gun. The Russian fired controlled bursts while moving straight toward the generator cradle. Mission first. Always. Cole dove behind the shattered crane arm beside Volkov as rounds sparked across the deck around them. Volkov held up the access tablet. I found the core controls. Cole looked at the Russian interface. Might as well have been ancient poetry. You can stop it? No. Her face tightened. But I can overload the containment cycle. Annie slid beside them, reloading the sniper rifle fast. What happens then? Volkov looked toward the humming generator. The field core destabilizes. Cole waited. She met his eyes. It explodes. Annie blinked once. Well, there's the healthy option. Another violent tremor rolled through the submarine pen. This one stronger. The cavern walls cracked visibly now. Seawater blasted through widening fissures along the cliffside. The entire base had started dying around them. Saranov reached the generator cradle and shouted orders in Russian toward the remaining sailors. Two operators began disconnecting the loading restraints manually, trying to move the generator into the submarine missile bay before the harbor collapsed completely. Cole watched them work. Fast. Experienced. Too fast. He grabbed Volkov's shoulder. How long to overload? 3 minutes after activation. Can you do it remotely? Yes. Then do it. Volkov hesitated. Cole saw it immediately. Problem. What? Her voice dropped lower. The blast radius inside the submarine pen. Annie understood first. Oh hell. Volkov looked toward the collapsing harbor. The overload will ignite the pressure harmonics already building beneath the shelf. Cole stared at her. How big? She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Another section of cavern ceiling collapsed into the harbor with a thunderous crash. A wave smashed across the submarine deck, hard enough to throw everyone sideways. The submarine finally tore free from two remaining mooring clamps and drifted slowly toward the fractured harbor channel. Saranov saw it too. Escape window opening. The Russian looked directly toward Cole across the flooded deck, then smiled again. Cole hated that smile more every chapter. Saranov shouted something toward the bridge crew. The submarine engines roared harder beneath the hull. Black smoke poured from the exhaust vents. The vessel began turning slowly toward the open sea beyond the collapsing cavern mouth. Annie chambered another round. We're running out of ugly choices. Cole looked toward the drifting submarine, then toward the overloaded generator controls in Volkov's shaking hands, then toward the collapsing harbor around them. The deck beneath their boots cracked loudly. Chapter 14. The submarine drifted sideways through the collapsing harbor like a wounded whale. Steel groaned beneath the pressure. Floodwater crashed across the deck. Behind it, the underground cavern continued tearing itself apart. Cole crouched beside the shattered crane arm, while chunks of ice and concrete rained into the black water around them. Volkov still held the overload controls in trembling hands. 3 minutes after activation. 3 minutes until catastrophe. And Saranov intended to leave with the generator before anybody could stop him. The Russian moved across the deck toward the bridge tower, barking commands at his remaining sailors, while the submarine engines thundered harder beneath the hull. The vessel slowly aligned toward the fractured harbor exit, leading to open Arctic water. Annie checked the sniper rifle. One clean shot ends him. Cole looked toward Saranov through the smoke and drifting snow. No. Annie frowned. That sounded stupid. He's not the problem anymore. Cole pointed toward the generator cradle. The containment cylinder vibrated visibly now. Frost melted from the outer shell. Thin streams of condensation rolled across the steel casing. Pressure building. Fast. Volkov stared at the control tablet. The harmonic levels keep rising. How long before this thing cooks everybody? She swallowed hard. Minutes. Gunfire erupted again from the upper maintenance catwalks. A surviving AES team pushed into the submarine pen, firing downward toward both the Russians and helicopter operators below. 3-sided firefight now. Maybe 4. Cole lost track around Chapter 8. One AES operator launched a grenade toward the submarine bridge. The explosion ripped apart the access walkway and hurled 2 sailors into the harbor below. The submarine drifted farther from the dock. Gap widening. Escape window opening. Saranov saw it too. The Russian turned toward the generator crew and shouted another order. 2 surviving operators began releasing the final loading restraints, holding the containment cylinder to the deck cradle. Annie looked toward Cole. If they move that thing inside the sub, this gets worse. Already noticed. Cole scanned the deck quickly. The loading crane still hung partly functional above the missile bay despite the collapsed support arm. Heavy magnetic lift system. Emergency cargo release. Manual controls sat maybe 30 yards away across open deck. Bad run. Worse cover. Good odds nobody expected it. Cole pointed toward the crane controls. I need 30 seconds. Annie looked over the exposed deck. You need a priest. Just shoot anybody ugly. That narrows nothing. Cole moved. He sprinted low across the flooded submarine deck, while bullets cracked through smoke around him from the AES catwalk teams overhead. The deck tilted again beneath his boots, as another section of harbor collapsed into the widening abyss below. Water surged sideways across the steel plating. Cole nearly lost footing near the shattered bridge supports but caught the safety rail and kept moving. Saranov spotted him immediately. Of course he did. The Russian raised the submachine gun and fired controlled bursts across the deck. Cole dove behind a missile loading cart as rounds punched sparks from the steel beside his head. Annie answered from behind the crane wreckage. Her sniper fire forced Saranov back behind the submarine tower. Temporary breathing room. Cole reached the crane control panel and ripped open the emergency housing. Old Soviet controls. Big switches. Industrial simplicity. One lever controlled magnetic lift release. Another operated emergency cargo swing. Cole grinned. Beautiful, ugly machinery. Then the AES operators above him finally found range. Automatic fire hammered the crane platform. One round shattered the control housing inches from Cole's face. Another tore through his sleeve. He slammed the emergency lift lever downward. The damaged overhead crane screamed alive. Massive cables tightened above the submarine deck. The magnetic cargo assembly swung violently across the loading area like a wrecking ball. Russian sailors scattered instantly. Too slow. The crane smashed through the generator support cradle, hard enough to tear steel bolts from the deck. The containment cylinder broke loose. Everybody froze for one terrible second. The generator rolled slowly across the tilted deck toward the open harbor edge. Saranov shouted something furious in Russian. Operators sprinted toward the drifting cylinder. Cole saw the problem immediately. If the generator went into the water, unstable. Volkov screamed across the deck. Stop it. Helpful suggestion. The containment cylinder slammed into the submarine rail, hard enough to crack the outer shell. Blue light leaked through the fracture. Not electrical. Something stranger. The humming sound deepened instantly. The whole submarine vibrated beneath it. Then every electronic system on deck flickered wildly. Lights strobed. Radios screamed static. The helicopter overhead spun sideways suddenly as instruments failed. The pilot lost control completely. The aircraft smashed into the upper cavern wall and exploded into fire and spinning debris. Shockwaves rolled across the harbor. The submarine drifted farther toward the open sea channel. The cracked generator cylinder continued pulsing blue light across the deck. Volkov stared at it in horror. The containment field collapsed. Cole looked toward her. Meaning, the harmonic reaction is free-running now. That sounds terrible. It means the overload sequence no longer matters. Annie grimaced. Well, that feels important. The cavern trembled violently again. Huge fractures split through the ice ceiling overhead. Black seawater erupted upward through the harbor floor in massive geysers. The submarine engines roared harder. Saranov abandoned the generator and sprinted toward the bridge hatch instead. Escape mode now. Cole grabbed a dead sailor's rifle and moved toward the containment cylinder carefully. The blue glow reflected across the flooded deck like ghost fire. The closer he got, the stronger the vibration became. Not sound anymore. Pressure. His teeth hurt. The steel deck beneath the cylinder had started buckling inward. Volkov reached him seconds later, breathing hard. You must get away from it. Cole stared at the cracked shell. Can we shut it down? No. Can we throw it overboard? Her hesitation answered before words did. Volkov. If the unstable core reaches seawater, another pulse blasted outward from the cylinder. Every light in the cavern died instantly. Darkness swallowed the submarine pen. Then emergency power returned weak and red. The generator glowed brighter now. Annie backed away slowly from the thing. That thing looks alive. Cole almost agreed. The submarine shifted suddenly beneath them. Not drifting. Moving. The engines had engaged full thrust. Saranov's crew had taken control of the vessel. The submarine began pushing toward the fractured harbor exit, leading into the Arctic Ocean beyond. Cole looked toward the widening channel ahead. Ice cliffs collapsing. Seawater roaring through fractured shelf lines. Open ocean, maybe 200 yards away. Too close. If the submarine escaped with the unstable generator. He didn't know exactly what happened. But everybody smarter than him looked terrified. Good enough. Cole looked toward the ballast controls again. Then toward the damaged crane cables hanging above the submarine tower. Then at the cracked generator, pulsing blue light across the deck. Improvisation territory. Dangerous territory. Favorite territory. Annie saw the look on his face immediately. Oh no. Cole pointed toward the tower. We sink it here. The submarine suddenly accelerated toward the collapsing harbor mouth. Chapter 15. The submarine surged forward through the collapsing harbor. Steel scraped concrete as the hull squeezed past shattered dock pylons toward the fractured sea channel ahead. Behind it, the underground cavern came apart piece by piece. Ice crashed from the ceiling. Floodwater poured through widening cracks in the cliff walls. Emergency sirens howled beneath the deeper roar of the unstable generator pulsing blue light across the deck. Cole grabbed Annie's arm and pointed toward the hanging crane cables above the tower. If we jam the sail structure, we trap the sub in the channel. Annie looked at the collapsing harbor mouth. You got exactly 6 seconds before this place folds like cheap luggage. Then no pressure. Volkov crouched near the cracked generator shell, staring at the readings on the damaged tablet. The glow from the cylinder painted her face blue-white. The harmonic field keeps expanding. Cole moved toward the tower ladder. How much expanding? She looked up sharply. The resonance waves are interacting with the seabed fractures now. That answer still sounds expensive. Annie chambered another sniper round. Cole. He followed her eyes upward. 2 surviving AES operators moved along the overhead maintenance gantry, carrying a portable launcher between them. They spotted the unstable generator instantly. One shouted, "Take the shot." The launcher came up. Cole fired first. The lead operator dropped backward against the railing. The second still squeezed the trigger. The rocket streaked downward toward the submarine deck, trailing smoke. Cole dove hard behind the ballast housing. The rocket slammed into the missile loading rail beside the generator. Explosion. The entire submarine deck vanished behind fire and smoke. Shockwaves punched across the harbor. Cole hit the steel plating shoulder first and slid through icy water. For one terrible second, he expected the generator to erupt. Instead, the blue glow intensified beneath the smoke. Still active. Worse now. Electrical arcs snapped across the deck around the cracked containment shell. Volkov screamed something in Russian from somewhere behind the wreckage. The submarine lurched violently. The engines surged harder. Still moving toward open water. Cole pushed himself upright through drifting smoke. The missile loading rails had collapsed sideways across the deck. One crane cable snapped loose overhead and whipped across the submarine tower hard enough to shear off antennas and radar equipment. Good start. Not enough. Annie emerged from behind the shattered crane assembly, coughing smoke. You alive? Cole checked the blood soaking one sleeve. Mostly. The submarine suddenly tilted hard starboard, as the harbor floor collapsed again beneath the aft section. Water surged across the deck knee-deep now. The vessel had entered the fractured sea channel. Open Arctic water churned beyond the cavern mouth, maybe 100 yards ahead. Too close. Saranov appeared briefly inside the shattered bridge windows, shouting commands to the crew. The Russian looked calm again. Cole disliked that. Then Volkov grabbed Cole's coat from behind. Her eyes looked wild now. The generator field is coupling with the submarine reactors. Cole stared at her. In normal language, the vessel itself is amplifying the resonance waves. Annie blinked once. That feels very unhealthy. The submarine engines screamed louder beneath the deck. Every light aboard flickered violently. The blue pulses from the generator spread across the hull itself now. Thin glowing fractures crawled along the steel plating like veins. Cole looked toward the submarine tower. Then toward the damaged crane cables overhead. Then toward the narrow channel ahead. Improvisation. Again. He pointed toward the upper catwalks beside the harbor mouth. Need access to the release winches. Annie looked over the collapsing deck. You planning to drop the ceiling on us? Trying for selective destruction. Very classy. Gunfire erupted behind them again. The surviving AES operator from the gantry had repositioned above the channel exit and opened fire downward across the deck. Rounds snapped through the smoke around them. Volkov dropped beside the damaged missile rails, while Cole and Annie scrambled toward the tower supports. The submarine rocked violently beneath them. Half the aft deck had started sinking lower into the floodwater. The vessel barely held balance now, inside the collapsing channel. Cole reached the maintenance ladder first, and climbed toward the harbor catwalks while Annie covered below. The steel structure shook constantly beneath his boots. Seawater exploded through cracks in the cavern walls all around him. Outside the harbor mouth, the Arctic Ocean churned beneath fractured ice fields stretching to the horizon. The whole coastline looked unstable now. Like the earth itself had started breaking apart. Cole reached the upper release platform, overlooking the submarine channel. Massive crane winches lined the catwalk. Each cable thick as a man's torso. One still connected to the damaged loading crane, hanging above the channel exit. Perfect. Below him, the submarine pushed closer toward open water. Saranov emerged from the bridge hatch onto the tower deck carrying a rifle. The Russian looked up immediately. Of course he did. Their eyes locked across the smoke-filled cavern. Then Saranov raised the rifle. Cole dropped behind the winch housing as bullets tore through the catwalk railing. Steel fragments sprayed across his face. Annie answered from below with sniper fire toward the tower. Saranov vanished behind cover again. Cole grabbed the emergency brake wheel on the nearest crane winch. Frozen solid. Naturally. He slammed the rifle stock against the locking pin repeatedly until the rusted mechanism cracked loose. The winch screamed alive. Above the harbor channel, the damaged crane arm shifted. Slow at first. Then faster. The massive steel boom swung sideways directly across the submarine's path. Russian sailors shouted warnings from below. Too late. The submarine tower slammed into the hanging crane arm with catastrophic force. Steel exploded outward across the channel. The crane collapsed onto the sail structure like a falling building. The submarine lurched sideways hard enough to smash against the harbor wall. Concrete shattered. Water erupted across the deck. The vessel stopped moving. For exactly 3 seconds. Then the engines roared harder. The submarine pushed forward anyway, dragging half the collapsed crane structure with it toward open water. Cole stared downward. "Well, damn," Annie shouted from below. "Need a bigger idea." The unstable generator pulsed again. This time, every electronic system in the harbor died completely. Darkness swallowed the cavern. The submarine engines sputtered. Emergency lights flickered weak and red across the flooding dockyard. Then something massive cracked outside beyond the harbor mouth. Not concrete. Not steel. Ice shelf. The sound rolled across the Arctic coastline like the world splitting open. Volkov's voice echoed upward through the darkness. "The outer shelf is collapsing." Cole looked toward the open sea. Beyond the harbor mouth, enormous sections of Arctic ice tilted and broke apart beneath rising black water. Waves slammed against the cliffside, hard enough to shake the entire submarine base. Then the ocean surged inward. A wall of seawater rushed into the harbor channel, straight toward the trapped submarine. Chapter 16. The wave hit the harbor channel like a freight train. Black Arctic seawater exploded through the cavern mouth and slammed into the trapped submarine broadside. The vessel rolled hard against the collapsed crane structure. Steel screamed. Concrete shattered. Men vanished instantly beneath the surge. Cole wrapped both arms around the catwalk railing as freezing water blasted upward through the harbor levels beneath him. The entire submarine base shook like it had taken a direct missile strike. Below, the submarine smashed sideways into the harbor wall hard enough to crack the tower structure open. Windows burst outward across the sail. One of the engines died instantly. The other kept roaring unevenly beneath the hull. Annie barely caught herself against the shattered loading platform before the surge carried 2 dead sailors past her into the flooded channel. Volkov disappeared completely beneath the black water. Cole saw it happen. Bad moment. Very bad moment. He jumped from the upper catwalk before his brain could object. The freezing seawater hit like a hammer to the chest. Every nerve in his body locked instantly. The current dragged him beneath the submarine hull, while debris crashed through the harbor around him. Dark water. Oil. Concrete dust. Something heavy slammed his shoulder underwater, hard enough to spin him sideways. Cole kicked upward through the freezing blackness until he broke the surface beside the loading rails. Men screamed somewhere through the chaos. Gunfire still cracked sporadically through the cavern. Nobody wanted to stop fighting, even during the apocalypse. Cole wiped water from his eyes and spotted Volkov clinging to a twisted crane cable 20 feet away while floodwater surged around her. The injured arm hung useless. The current kept dragging her toward the collapsing harbor fracture behind the submarine. Cole fought through the freezing water toward her. Every breath hurt now. The Arctic cold cut straight into muscle and bone. Volkov saw him and shouted something he couldn't hear over the roaring water. Then the submarine shifted again. The vessel broke partially free from the collapsed crane trap and lurched toward open water. Not fast enough. Saranov emerged from the damaged tower hatch, dragging one wounded crewman behind him. The Russian saw Cole immediately through the flooding harbor. Still calm. Still impossible. He raised a pistol. Cole shoved Volkov downward behind the crane debris, just as rounds punched into the water around them. Annie answered from somewhere above. The sniper round shattered against the submarine tower beside Saranov's head. The Russian retreated back into the sail structure. Cole grabbed Volkov's coat and hauled her toward the partially submerged maintenance platform. The scientist gasped through clenched teeth. The generator. Cole looked toward the missile bay. The cracked containment cylinder still sat wedged against the loading rails midship. Blue light pulsed through the floodwater around it. The seawater itself glowed faintly now. That felt deeply wrong. Annie appeared above them, on the shattered dock platform. You two planning to drown professionally? Cole shoved Volkov upward toward the platform edge. Working through options. Annie hauled Volkov onto the deck while Cole climbed after them, dripping seawater. The cold hit harder out of the water. His hands shook slightly now. Bad sign. The harbor continued, collapsing around them. Huge sections of the cavern's ceiling dropped into the floodwater, while waves hammered the trapped submarine against the broken channel walls. The vessel sat jammed sideways now beneath the collapsed crane arm. Half grounded. Half afloat. Temporary prison. Not permanent enough. Volkov coughed seawater onto the steel deck. The field core destabilized further. Cole leaned against the shattered railing, catching breath. Any good news hidden inside that sentence? No. Consistency matters. Another deep tremor rolled beneath the harbor. Not from explosions this time. Movement. The entire coastline outside had started shifting beneath the resonance waves. Cole looked toward the cavern mouth. The Arctic beyond looked wrong now. Ice shelves cracked apart beneath massive swells. Steam rose from fractures in the frozen sea. Even the sky seemed unstable somehow. Annie checked the remaining rounds in her rifle. We need out. Cole nodded. Soon as we stop global catastrophe. That sentence belongs on a coffee mug. Volkov suddenly grabbed his sleeve. Her face had gone pale again. The submarine reactors. Cole looked toward the crippled vessel. What about them? The resonance field, coupled with the reactor systems. That phrase again. If the reactor shielding fails. The answer hit him before she finished. Boom. Large boom. Behind them, the surviving AES operator staggered onto the upper dock platform, carrying the portable launcher from earlier. Blood soaked one side of his cold-weather gear. Man looked half dead. Still determined. He aimed the launcher directly at the unstable generator lodged on the submarine deck. Volkov saw it first. No. Cole fired instantly. Too late. The AES operator squeezed the trigger as Cole's round hit him center mass. The rocket streaked downward, trailing smoke. Everybody moved at once. Cole tackled Volkov sideways behind the collapsed railing. Annie dove flat across the flooded deck. The rocket slammed into the submarine hull, directly beneath the missile bay. The world detonated. Fire erupted upward through the center of the vessel. The blast punched straight through the loading compartment beneath the generator. Steel folded outward. The submarine split open along the damaged missile rails. Blue light erupted from the cracked containment cylinder, like lightning exploding underwater. Then every sound vanished. Not silence. Pressure. The resonance pulse rolled outward across the harbor in an invisible wave. Floodwater froze instantly across sections of the dock. Steel support beams bent sideways. Every remaining light exploded throughout the cavern. Cole hit the deck hard enough to lose breath completely. His ears rang. His vision blurred. The harbor wall cracked open behind the submarine. Then the ocean itself seemed to rise. A massive column of seawater erupted upward beneath the crippled vessel and lifted the submarine halfway out of the channel. The ship twisted sideways unnaturally. Hull plates peeled open. The sail structure snapped backward. Saranov emerged from the shattered tower hatch as the vessel broke apart beneath him. For the first time all night, the Russian looked shocked. The submarine rolled violently toward the collapsing harbor fracture. Crewmen scrambled across the deck screaming. Too late. The entire aft section disappeared into the widening chasm beneath the base. The front half remained jammed beneath the collapsed crane assembly, while seawater poured through the shattered hull. Cole forced himself upright beside Annie and Volkov. The unstable generator still glowed inside the wrecked missile compartment. Still active. Impossible. Annie stared at it through smoke and steam. How the hell is that thing still running? Volkov looked horrified. It's feeding directly from the reactor core now. Cole stared at the sinking submarine. Then at the widening fractures tearing through the harbor walls around them. Then at the generator glowing inside the broken hull. He understood the math without needing Volkov's science lecture. If the submarine reactor went critical inside an unstable resonance field, no more Arctic problem. World problem. Annie looked at him carefully. That face means you got another bad idea. Cole grabbed a dead sailor's demolition satchel from the flooded deck. Working on a worse one. Chapter 17. The submarine died slowly. Steel groaned beneath the floodwater, while the shattered hull settled deeper into the collapsing harbor channel. Blue light pulsed through the broken missile compartment like a heartbeat. Wrong rhythm. Wrong color. The generator still fed from the damaged reactor core, somewhere beneath the wreckage. Cole crouched beside the flooded maintenance platform, checking the demolition satchel. Old Russian naval charges. Manual detonators. Enough explosive compound to ruin a small building. Not enough for what he needed. Annie watched him carefully while seawater crashed through the dying submarine pen around them. That look usually ends with property damage. Cole secured the detonator cord around his wrist. Trying to broaden my horizons. Volkov leaned against the twisted railing, breathing hard. Her lips had started turning pale from cold exposure. We need distance from the reactor. Cole glanced toward the broken submarine. Need shutdown first. There may not be one anymore. Positive thinking, never your thing. The harbor trembled again. One entire crane tower finally gave up and collapsed sideways into the water with a roar of tearing steel. The impact sent another surge across the flooded docks. Cole studied the submarine carefully. The vessel sat trapped halfway into the fractured harbor mouth now. The collapsed crane arm pinned the sail structure against the cliff wall, while floodwater poured through the shattered missile bay. The damaged generator pulsed deeper blue each cycle. Faster now. Volkov saw it too. The harmonic frequency keeps climbing. Cole pointed toward the reactor section. If I place charges inside the engineering spaces. Her face tightened. You could rupture the reactor containment. That already sounds ruptured. The pressure wave from a reactor breach inside the resonance field. Bigger boom, Annie said. Volkov looked at her sharply. Yes. Annie shrugged. Keeping up now. A sudden burst of gunfire cracked through the harbor. Everybody spun, instinctively. Saranov emerged from the forward section of the crippled submarine, with 3 surviving Russian operators moving behind him. Wet. Bleeding. Still organized. The butcher of Chechnya carried a compact rifle in one hand and a metal case in the other. Cole recognized the case immediately. Portable core control unit. Saranov hadn't abandoned the mission after all. The Russian saw Cole beside the maintenance platform and stopped. Floodwater churned between them while the dying harbor collapsed around the submarine. For a second, neither moved. Then Saranov spoke calmly across the wreckage. You should have left earlier. Cole rested the demolition satchel beside his boot. Night got complicated. Saranov glanced toward the unstable generator. The Americans always misunderstand long-term strategy. Annie muttered. Here comes the speech. The Russian ignored her. The Arctic changes everything. shipping, resources, military positioning. Nations kill for smaller advantages. Cole nodded slightly. Still murdered a lot of people. History rarely remembers logistics. The surviving Russian operators spread carefully through the flooded debris field. Good angles. Professional containment. Cole noticed immediately. So did Annie. Volkov stepped forward, despite the cold shaking her injured arm. You knew the field would destabilize the shelf. Saranov looked at her almost sadly. Progress costs. Children died in Murmansk. Children die everywhere. That landed differently. Even Annie went quiet. Cole saw something in Volkov's face harden permanently. The scientist looked done with explanations. Done with politics. Good. Saranov lifted the metal control case slightly. The core still stabilizes if transferred manually. Cole stared at him. You still think you're leaving here? The Russian looked toward the fractured harbor mouth, where black Arctic water surged through collapsing ice beyond the cavern. One submarine dies. Another waits. Cole almost admired the commitment. Then one of the Russian operators spotted the demolition satchel beside Cole. Weapons came up instantly. Annie fired before anybody else moved. Her sniper round punched through the nearest operator's throat. The harbor exploded into gunfire. Cole dove sideways behind the shattered dock supports while rounds hammered sparks across the steel around him. Saranov's remaining men moved well. Fast transitions. Controlled bursts. Russian special operations living up to the brochure. Cole returned fire through the flooding debris while Annie repositioned along the upper maintenance rail. Volkov crawled behind a collapsed pipe assembly, clutching the damaged tablet against her chest. One Russian operator flanked wide through the flooded loading platforms, trying to cut Annie's angle. Cole saw the movement and grabbed a loose section of hanging crane cable beside him. Improvisation, again. Probably unhealthy. He wrapped the cable around a submerged dock strut and yanked hard. The tensioned crane assembly shifted violently overhead. The damaged steel beam broke loose and swung downward across the flooded platform. The flanking operator looked up too late. The beam crushed him into the rising water. Saranov fired controlled bursts toward Cole's position while retreating steadily toward the submarine bow. Not panicking. Falling back with purpose. Cole understood suddenly. The Russian wasn't escaping. He was buying time. For the reactor. Volkov screamed across the harbor. The reactor levels are spiking. Blue light flashed brighter through the shattered missile compartment. The pulse rolled outward visibly now. Water vibrated around the submarine hull. Steel groaned deep beneath the harbor floor. Saranov reached the forward hatch near the submarine bow and slammed the metal case into a control terminal mounted beside the access door. The hatch opened. Cole realized exactly where it led. Engineering. Reactor access. Oh hell. He sprinted through the flooded debris field before his brain caught up. Saranov saw him coming. The Russian fired twice while backing into the hatchway. Cole slid behind a tilted loading rail as bullets shattered concrete beside his head. Annie fired from above. One round clipped Saranov across the shoulder. The Russian staggered, but disappeared inside the forward hatch anyway. Cole reached the entrance seconds later. The engineering corridor beyond glowed blue from emergency reactor lighting. Steam drifted through the narrow passageways. Warning alarms screamed inside the submarine hull. Volkov reached the hatch behind him, breathing hard. You cannot let him stabilize the core. Cole looked into the reactor corridor. What happens if he succeeds? She met his eyes. He starts over somewhere else. Simple answer. Ugly answer. Cole checked the remaining rounds in his rifle. Not many. Annie moved beside him, holding the sniper rifle one-handed now. You going in there? Cole looked down the glowing corridor, where steam rolled across the steel deck beneath flickering emergency lights. Then he looked back toward the collapsing harbor. The submarine pen had maybe minutes left before the entire cliffside dropped into the sea. Seems rude not to. Chapter 18. The forward engineering corridor felt alive. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes overhead, while emergency lights pulsed blue along the steel passageways beneath the submarine bow. The reactor alarms screamed non-stop somewhere deeper inside the vessel. Cole entered first with rifle raised. Annie followed close behind. Volkov stayed near the hatch, watching the collapsing harbor outside through drifting smoke and seawater. The submarine tilted farther every few seconds now. Deck angles shifting beneath their boots. Flood water rushed through lower compartments somewhere below the engineering level. Saranov had vanished into the reactor section ahead. Cole moved carefully through the narrow corridor. Submarine interiors always looked designed by men who hated shoulders. Steel bulkheads. Tight corners. Low overhead piping. Bad visibility. Perfect ambush territory. Annie touched the wall beside her. Feel that? Cole nodded. The vibration had changed. Not steady anymore. Uneven pulses rolled through the submarine hull beneath their boots, like the ship itself struggled to breathe. Volkov's voice echoed from behind them. The reactor containment is failing faster. Cole called back. How much faster? No idea. At least the honesty remained consistent. A metallic clang echoed deeper inside the engineering section. Movement. Saranov. Cole advanced toward the reactor access chamber, while steam drifted through the corridor thick enough to blur visibility. Then he saw the body. One Russian engineer slumped against the bulkhead, near an open control cabinet. Dead maybe 10 minutes. Single gunshot wound beneath the jaw. Execution style. Annie crouched briefly beside the corpse. He killed his own reactor man. Cole looked toward the open engineering hatch ahead. No loose ends. The hatch door stood partially open. Blue emergency light flickered inside. Cole moved toward it slowly. Then stopped. The deck plating near the hatch looked wrong. Scraped clean in a narrow line. Tripwire. Thin and low stretched across the threshold. Cole crouched carefully. Military fragmentation grenade wired inside the hatch frame. Soviet design. Simple. Efficient. Annie exhaled quietly. Charming guy. Cole cut the wire carefully with the dead engineer's utility knife. The grenade dropped harmlessly into his palm. Waste not. The reactor chamber beyond looked like hell. Steam filled half the compartment. Control panels sparked constantly. Cooling pipes ruptured along the ceiling. And at the center of it all, the reactor core glowed faint blue behind cracked shielding glass. Wrong color again. Saranov stood near the main control station, entering commands into the portable case interface. One surviving Russian operator guarded the rear access ladder beside him. Both men turned immediately as Cole entered the chamber. No surprise now. Saranov looked exhausted for the first time. Blood soaked one sleeve from Annie's earlier shot. But his eyes stayed steady. Always steady. The Russian operator raised his rifle. Cole threw the grenade first. The operator reacted instinctively and dove sideways behind the coolant manifold. Cole fired twice before the man recovered. The rounds punched through the operator's chest rig and slammed him backward across the reactor floor. Dead before he landed. Saranov never even looked at him. The Russian kept working the reactor controls calmly. Steam rolled through the chamber around him, while warning sirens screamed overhead. Cole leveled the rifle. Done running. Saranov typed one final command into the control unit. Then closed the case. No. The submarine shuddered violently beneath them. Outside, something massive collapsed in the harbor. The engineering lights flickered. The reactor glow deepened brighter blue behind the cracked shielding. Volkov entered the chamber and saw the control readings instantly. Her face drained pale. He redirected the reactor output. Cole looked toward her. In normal language. He fed the resonance field directly into the core stabilization cycle. Annie blinked once. That sounds deeply irresponsible. Saranov finally looked toward Volkov. The field survives now. You're killing everyone in this harbor. The Russian shrugged slightly. History forgets locations. Cole stepped closer. You got a real talent for speeches nobody likes. Saranov looked toward him calmly. You still think tactically. Small scale. Immediate survival. He tapped the metal control case lightly. Nations think differently. Cole glanced around the dying reactor chamber. Seems like nations build ugly rooms. Then Saranov moved. Fast. The Russian kicked open a lower maintenance hatch beside the reactor controls and dropped through it before Cole fired. The round smashed sparks from the steel ladder as Saranov disappeared below deck. Cole rushed the hatch instantly. Steam poured upward from the access shaft beneath. Emergency ladders descended into darkness below the reactor compartment. Volkov grabbed his arm hard. No. Cole looked back. The lower reactor levels are flooding. Noted. If the shielding ruptures while you're down there. Boom. Yes. Annie peered down the shaft. Feels like we say that word too much. A deep metallic crack rolled through the submarine hull. Then the entire vessel shifted violently sideways. Everybody slammed against the bulkheads as seawater exploded through a rupture somewhere below deck. The harbor outside roared louder now. Closer. The submarine had started slipping deeper into the collapsing channel. Volkov checked the reactor monitor desperately. The core temperature keeps climbing. Cole looked down the dark ladder shaft, where steam drifted upward through flickering blue light. Then toward the reactor chamber behind him. Then back toward Volkov. Can you shut this thing down from here? She hesitated too long. No. Annie sighed heavily. So, naturally, we go lower. Cole grabbed the emergency ladder and started descending into the flooding darkness beneath the reactor deck. Behind him, the submarine groaned like something dying slowly underwater. Chapter 19. The lower reactor levels looked like the inside of a sinking refinery. Steam rolled through narrow maintenance corridors while freezing seawater surged knee-deep across the steel decks beneath flickering emergency lights. Cole descended the ladder first into heat, smoke, and rising floodwater. The submarine groaned around him continuously now. Not random sounds anymore. Structural failure. The vessel had started dying for real. Annie climbed down behind him, with the sniper rifle slung tight across her back. Anybody else smell burning metal? Cole nodded. The air carried reactor coolant, diesel fuel, scorched wiring, and seawater. Bad combination. Ahead, dim blue light pulsed through the flooded corridor from somewhere deeper beneath the engineering spaces. Saranov's direction. Volkov remained above near the reactor controls, shouting readings down through the ladder shaft. The containment temperature keeps rising. Cole called upward. How long? Maybe 10 minutes. Generous estimate, probably. The corridor tilted sharply beneath them, as the submarine settled farther into the collapsing harbor. Floodwater rushed harder through the lower decks now. Annie checked the dark passage ahead. Submarines officially belong on my list of terrible vacation spots. Cole moved carefully through the flooding corridor. Pipes burst overhead, spraying steam across the bulkheads. Emergency red lights flashed weakly through drifting smoke. The farther they descended, the stronger the blue resonance glow became. The pulse rolled through the steel walls beneath their hands. Alive again. Wrong again. Then Cole spotted fresh blood in the floodwater ahead. Not much. Shoulder wound trail. Saranov slowing, finally. Good. The corridor split near the lower reactor access section. One route descended deeper, beneath the engineering compartments. The other led toward torpedo storage and ballast control. Cole crouched briefly near the junction. Water disturbance favored the lower route. Heavy footsteps. Dragging pace. Annie watched the darkness ahead. You think he's trying to escape or finish the job? Both. That felt like Saranov. The submarine lurched violently again. This time, the lower corridor lights died completely for several seconds. Darkness swallowed everything, except the faint blue glow pulsing through the flooded compartments. Then emergency power returned weak and unstable. Water suddenly surged harder past their legs. Cole looked back toward the engineering ladder. The angle had changed again. The submarine bow was sinking deeper. Annie saw it too. We're running out of boat. A metallic slam echoed somewhere ahead. Followed by another. Watertight hatches closing manually. Cole moved faster through the flooded corridor. The lower reactor compartment opened ahead through drifting steam. Massive coolant pipes lined the walls surrounding the reactor support chambers beneath the main core housing above. And standing near the emergency ballast controls. Saranov. The Russian held the metal control case beneath one arm, while working the manual flood valves with the other hand. Blue resonance light reflected across his face. Calm as ever. Cole raised the rifle. Busy night. Saranov glanced toward him. Still alive. Impressive. The flood water around them kept rising steadily. Annie moved wide through the lower coolant aisle, trying for angle. Saranov noticed immediately. Careful, he said calmly. One bullet through the coolant system ends negotiation. Cole looked around the chamber. Cracked pressure gauges. Flooded reactor conduits. Steam venting from broken pipes. The guy had a point. Annoying when villains did that. Saranov turned another ballast wheel slowly. The submarine tilted farther downward. Water rushed harder through the compartment toward the bow sections. Cole frowned. You're sinking your own escape route. The vessel already died. Then what's the plan? Saranov tapped the control case lightly again. The field survives. Cole finally understood. The Russian intended to preserve the resonance data long enough for retrieval later. Doesn't matter if the submarine sank. Doesn't matter if everybody died. As long as the weapon blueprint survived. Volkov's voice crackled faintly through Annie's handheld radio. The reactor shielding is collapsing. Saranov heard it too. A faint smile crossed his face. You see, he said to Cole. Nobody leaves with victory. Cole took another step forward through the rising water. Funny thing about that. The Russian tilted his head slightly. You think you win because you survive fights. But nations continue long after men like us disappear. Cole shrugged. Maybe. Then he kicked the floating toolbox beside his boot, directly into the coolant pipe assembly behind Saranov. The steel box slammed into the damaged valve cluster. Steam exploded sideways across the reactor compartment. Visibility vanished instantly. Cole moved through it. Fast. Saranov fired blind through the steam cloud. Rounds punched through pipes overhead, spraying boiling coolant across the chamber. Annie dropped low behind the ballast housing, while Cole drove through the steam towards Saranov's last position. The Russian met him halfway. Knife already out. Of course. The two men crashed hard against the flooding bulkhead, while the submarine groaned around them. Saranov moved like a soldier who'd spent his whole life fighting in ugly places. No wasted motion. No panic. Knife hand tight and efficient. Cole trapped the wrist against the bulkhead, as freezing seawater surged around their knees. The blade scraped sparks across steel inches from his throat. Saranov drove a shoulder into Cole's ribs hard enough to force air from his lungs. The Russian still had strength left. Too much. Cole slammed his forehead into Saranov's nose. Bone cracked. Saranov staggered backward through the floodwater, but kept hold of the knife. Annie tried finding a shot through the steam. No angle. Saranov attacked again, instantly. Knife flashing low this time. Cole caught the wrist again, but the blade sliced deep across his forearm, before he twisted sideways and drove Saranov into the reactor pipe housing. The damaged coolant valve ruptured fully. Scalding steam blasted across the chamber. Saranov recoiled instinctively. Cole ripped the control case from the Russian's grip and hurled it across the flooded compartment. The case smashed against the ballast controls and burst open. Hard drives. Data modules. Control chips. All scattered into freezing seawater. For the first time all night, Saranov lost composure. Real anger crossed his face. The Russian lunged toward the flooded electronics. Cole tackled him sideways before he reached them. Both men crashed through the rising water into the lower maintenance rail. The submarine suddenly shifted downward, violently. The bow compartments had started flooding completely. Water roared through the lower reactor chamber, now waist-deep, and climbing fast. Annie grabbed the shattered control case from the water, while steam filled the compartment around them. Cole. Saranov slammed an elbow into Cole's injured shoulder hard enough to numb the entire arm. Then the Russian reached the dropped knife again. Cole saw it too late. Saranov drove the blade forward and froze. Annie stood behind him, with the sniper rifle muzzle pressed against the base of his skull. "End of the line," she said quietly. The reactor alarms suddenly changed pitch. Higher. Faster. Volkov screamed through the radio. "The core is failing now." The blue resonance pulse erupted through the compartment, hard enough to knock everybody sideways into the floodwater. Every light exploded. The submarine groaned deep beneath them. Then the lower reactor chamber split open along the floor seam. Chapter 20. The reactor chamber floor split apart beneath them with a scream of tearing steel. Freezing seawater exploded upward through the rupture. Cole slammed against the bulkhead, hard enough to lose grip on the flooded maintenance rail, while the submarine tilted sharply bow down into the collapsing harbor. Saranov crashed sideways into the rising water beside him. The knife disappeared into the flooding compartment. Annie barely kept hold of the rifle, as the lower reactor deck buckled beneath everybody's feet. Then the emergency lights died completely. Darkness. Only the blue resonance glow remained. It pulsed through the reactor chamber like lightning, trapped underwater. Volkov's voice crackled through the radio above them. The core breach started. Cole pushed himself upright through waist-deep freezing water while steam poured from ruptured coolant lines overhead. The submarine had started sinking for real now. No recovery. No stabilization. Final act. Annie still held the rifle on Saranov despite the chaos. The Russian stood chest-deep in freezing water, staring toward the shattered reactor controls where the resonance glow intensified beneath cracked shielding. Even now, he looked calm. Cole hated that almost professionally. The reactor alarms screamed louder. Then one entire wall panel burst inward. Seawater flooded violently into the compartment. The submarine shifted another terrifying degree downward. Everything loose in the reactor chamber slid toward the flooding bow sections, including the scattered data drives from Saranov's control case. The Russian moved instantly. Not toward escape. Toward the floating drives. Cole understood immediately. Of course. Mission first, until the end. Cole lunged through the floodwater and tackled Saranov before the Russian reached the drifting electronics. Both men slammed into the reactor bulkhead as seawater surged around them. Saranov drove a fist into Cole's injured arm, hard enough to light fire through the shoulder. Cole answered with a headbutt that split the Russian's eyebrow open. Blood mixed with seawater across the flooding compartment. The submarine groaned again. A deep, ugly sound. Structural collapse. Annie grabbed 2 floating drives from the water and stuffed them into her jacket. Whatever this junk is, he doesn't get it. Saranov heard that. For the first time all night, the Russian lost discipline completely. He drove forward through the floodwater with pure violence now. No calm strategy. No speeches. Just fury. Cole met him halfway. The 2 men crashed across the tilted reactor floor while freezing seawater surged around them. Saranov fought like a man who expected to die already. Dangerous type. He slammed Cole against the ruptured coolant pipes and reached for a loose steel wrench floating nearby. Cole trapped the arm before the Russian brought it down. Both men strained against each other while the submarine sank around them. Then the resonance pulse hit again. Blue light erupted through the reactor chamber. The entire submarine shook violently. Above them, something enormous collapsed in the harbor. The bow dropped lower. Water surged over everybody's shoulders now. Annie shouted, "We need to move." Cole saw the reactor shielding crack fully behind Saranov. Bright blue-white light poured through the fractures now. Volkov's voice screamed through the radio. "The core is going critical." Saranov heard it too. The Russian looked toward the reactor glow. Then back at Cole. And smiled again. "Even now. History remembers power," he said quietly. Cole drove the wrench into the side of Saranov's head. The Russian collapsed sideways into the floodwater. Didn't get back up. No final speech. No dramatic last move. Just a dead man in a dying submarine. Cole grabbed Annie's arm. "Move." They climbed through the flooding reactor chamber toward the engineering ladder while seawater roared through collapsing compartments below. The submarine tilted steeper every second now. Steam filled the corridors. Emergency lights flashed weak red through drifting smoke. Cole reached the upper engineering hatch and nearly collided with Volkov descending toward them. The scientist grabbed the reactor railing, breathing hard. The resonance field destabilized completely. Cole hauled her toward the ladder. "Then we leave. The field core may still rupture." That sentence no longer surprises me. The submarine groaned again. Then the harbor outside thundered. The cliffside had finally started collapsing into the Arctic Ocean. Concrete dust blasted through the engineering corridors, while steel bulkheads warped visibly around them. Annie climbed first through the reactor hatch toward the upper decks. Cole shoved Volkov upward behind her. The engineering corridor looked worse now. Floodwater rushed through the submarine interior waist-high, while sparks rained from broken electrical panels overhead. The bow compartments had already vanished beneath the harbor water. The vessel continued sliding deeper into the fractured channel outside. Cole climbed after them through smoke and steam, while the reactor alarms merged into one constant mechanical scream. The upper missile deck had become a wreck. Half flooded, half collapsed. The unstable generator still glowed inside the shattered loading compartment near the broken crane rails. Blue pulses rolled outward through the submarine hull and into the harbor beyond. Volkov stared at it in horror. It's feeding directly into the reactor breach now. Cole looked toward the shattered harbor mouth ahead. The entire cavern outside had opened to the Arctic Sea. Ice shelves collapsed beneath massive black waves rolling through the broken coastline. No helicopters remained. No gunfire. No mercenaries. The whole battlefield had finally surrendered to the ocean. Annie pointed toward the maintenance bridge, still hanging partly intact above the flooded dockyard. That's our exit. The submarine lurched violently again, then stopped. For one strange second, everything went still. No shaking, no movement. Only the deep hum of the unstable generator. Volkov looked toward the reactor readings on the damaged tablet. Her face drained pale. No. Cole saw it too late. The resonance pulse had synchronized with the reactor core. The blue glow inside the missile compartment intensified until shadows disappeared across the submarine deck. The air itself vibrated now, like pressure before lightning. Volkov looked directly at Cole. We have maybe 60 seconds. That many. Annie grabbed Volkov and started toward the hanging bridge. Cole stopped beside the glowing generator. The cracked containment shell pulsed brighter each cycle. Wrong machine. Wrong place. Wrong century, maybe. Then he spotted the collapsed crane cable, still wrapped around the missile loading rails above the reactor breach. Improvisation territory again. Cole grabbed the emergency release lever beside the damaged crane housing. Annie saw him stop halfway across the bridge. No. Cole looked toward the hanging generator. If this thing blows inside the harbor. You don't know that. Volkov answered instead. Yes, he does. The submarine shifted lower beneath the waterline. Blue light erupted through the deck seams. Cole pulled the crane release. The damaged loading assembly screamed downward across the missile compartment. Steel beams collapsed directly onto the unstable generator. The containment shell ruptured completely. Pure blue-white light exploded upward through the submarine hull. Cole ran. The maintenance bridge swayed violently over the flooded harbor while the submarine disappeared beneath expanding light behind them. Annie dragged Volkov across the collapsing platform toward the outer maintenance tunnel. Cole hit the bridge hard behind them just as the harbor detonated. Not fire. Pressure. The resonance blast rolled through the collapsing cavern like a giant invisible hammer. Steel folded. Ice shattered. The submarine vanished beneath boiling seawater and white light. The shockwave threw all three of them through the maintenance tunnel entrance as the entire submarine base collapsed into the Arctic Ocean behind them. Darkness swallowed everything. Then silence. Real silence this time. Cole woke sometime later beneath drifting snow near the outer cliffside. Gray daylight filtered through blowing ice above him. The Arctic Ocean stretched beyond the broken coastline where the submarine base once existed. Nothing remained except fractured ice and black water. Annie sat nearby, wrapped in a survival blanket beside a small fire built from wreckage debris. Volkov rested against a stone outcrop with the damaged tablet beside her. Alive. Cole considered that a strong opening development. Annie handed him a metal cup of hot coffee. Thought you were dead. Cole took the cup. Morning improves my attitude. Volkov looked toward the shattered Arctic horizon. The resonance signatures are gone. Cole stared out across the frozen sea. No submarines. No helicopters. No Saranov. Just wind and ice and endless gray water. Annie sipped her coffee beside him. So what now? Cole looked toward the horizon a long moment before answering. Somebody else always builds another ugly machine. The end. The Shadowboxer files. Asset. Render. Operative. Sideways. Choke point. Decreed. In the dark. True nature. Nominee. Credible threat. Devil's rope. Danger close. Blood ransom. Ghost coup. Foreign target. Tin men. Echo point. No known connection. The Death King. Dead drop. Colombian gold. Web of lies. Corrupt Caracas. The Venezuelan conflict. Judge's gambit. Whistle blower. The Shadowboxer files massive box set. Geneva job. Perimeter. Zero trace. Target rich. Special activities. Deep dive. Deception tide. Miami mirage. Cuban crossfire. Weapons grade. Canvas code. Weapons free. Panama proxy. Mojave mirage. Mission critical. Sleeper cell. Doomsday protocol. Depth charge. King maker. Protocol. Mission brief box set. Forward deploy. The Shadowboxer. Loose ends. Vegas debt. Cost of war. Stories of war. Fog of war. Sounds of war.